Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto hates Kushina and his sister part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Namikaze Minato had never been through such a turbulent night in his life. It had all started extremely well, with his wife giving birth to their second child, a girl they had named Haruki. After incurring some tremendous success with their first child, Minato and Kushina were confident they could have more kids, with Kyuubi remaining sealed within Kushina completely. And so it had. Kushina had undergone another successful pregnancy, with Kyuubi still remaining sealed within her by using the exact same method when she had given birth to Naruto. That is, being placed in a secure location outside the village and have a barrier erected around the area. When this was done, he would make sure to give Sarutobi Biwako an expensive gift for helping them with 2 births. And so, the Hokage felt his heart warm when he looked upon his daughter for the first time. God, she was beautiful. She had bright, blonde hair, much like himself and Naruto, but it was straight like her mother and of a slightly lighter tint. As she opened her eyes for the first time, he caught a glimpse of her face. It was very much like her mother's, with much more rounded facial features and gray eyes. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" said Kushina, as the proud parents began to admire their newborn daughter. Minato half-heartedly put out one of his hands, stopping at 3 feet in front of Haruki's face. The baby stared in confusion up at her father, before she giggled and reached out her arms at him, trying to touch his hand. A small tear ran down the man's face, and he reached out to gently touch his daughter's small hand. But the happiness he felt from seeing his newborn daughter fell short. That is, when the creepy masked guy somehow got through the barrier and grabbed his daughter, threatening to kill her unless he stepped away from Kushina. That was when his day took a turn for the worse. And a lot of things happened to make it that way. For starters, he was separated from Kushina via exploding tags, which allowed the masked man to capture Kushina and use a Fuinjutsu to chain her to a bunch of rocks so he could extract the Kyuubi. The thing that really killed his day was the extract the Kyuubi part. When Minato used his Hiraishin to get to the spot, he was immediately relieved to see Kushina still alive and well, a penchant of her clan's legendary longevity. But he felt a cold dreadness as he glimpsed at the Kyuubi before teleporting away to the place where they had left Haruki. His heart nearly stopped when he teleported into the village to see the Kyuubi rampaging everywhere. What an awful scene. Buildings were in shambles, bodies torn to pieces were thrown all over the streets. He steeled himself at the sight of the Kyuubi goring another shinobi in the distance. He had stopped Kyuubi's attack from hitting him using a space-time technique, but he couldn't stop the masked man from slipping through his guard and use another space-time technique to teleport both of them back to his clan compound. That was where he engaged with the man he learned of to be Uchiha Madara. After a multitude of space-time techniques, by both parties, Minato finally managed to gain the upper hand and strike the elder Uchiha with a full-powered Rasengan. He went in for another attack, this time aiming to wrest the Kyuubi from Madara's control, when a childish voice made him halt. "Daddy?" Minato's eyes widened, and he turned away from his injured enemy to see his 2-year-old son standing on the front porch of their compound. He was shaking wildly, tears pouring from his eyes as he saw his father engaged with an opponent. "And Naruto," gasped Minato. What was going on? Didn't he leave an ANBU in charge of him while his sister was being born? "Daddy!" cried Naruto again, as his stubbly toddler legs began running towards his father. "Naruto, don't!" yelled Minato, holding his hand out trying to stop him. "Oh, your son, eh?" said Madara from the ground, relieved that he still had control over the fox. He weakly got to his feet, a large gaping hole in his cloak and undershirt where the Rasengan had hit earlier. "I've been too injured to continue this fight, so I think I'll let the Kyuubi do the rest of the work." Without allowing Minato to even respond to that, he teleported away back to the main battle. Minato fell to his knees, panting. He would have to rejoin the battle and somehow reseal the Kyuubi. He was just about to get to his feet when he felt a slight tug on the hem of his Hokage robe. His resolution fell when he looked into his son's confused, worried face. "Daddy, what's going on?" the toddler asked. Minato's gaze softened completely, before he placed a tender hand on his son's head. "Oh, nothing, Naruto. Daddy's just having a little problem, is all. But he'll fix it, just like he always. Just go find mommy and stay with her until I'm finished, okay?" Naruto grinned, an eerie likeness to Kushina's smile. "Okay," he chirped happily, before he skipped off back into the house, almost tripping on his own 2 feet. Minato smiled softly as he watched the little boy head back into the house. It was times like these he realized how lucky he actually was. As soon as the boy was out of sight, The Hokage glared, setting a look of determination on his face. And with that, he was gone. Minato thought the fight with Kyuubi and Madara would be the most difficult one he had ever had. That is, until Kushina showed up out of nowhere and used her famous chakra chains to bind herself to the Kyuubi. A now awake Haruki was crying her eyes out, and a frightened Naruto appeared from behind his mother, clutching her kimono tightly. He was looking at his sister for the first time in his life, and wasn't sure if he should feel happiness at that, or fear of the whole dangerous situation. He had shot down the idea of Kushina resealing the Kyuubi into herself and dying, and was now proclaiming that he would seal the Kyuubi into his newborn daughter using Shiki Fujin instead. He now saw that Haruki was meant to be a Jinchuriki, the Jinchuriki to lead the ninja world to their bright, bright future. Already he could hear his sensei's words echo in his head, a story of a divine, prophetic child that was to be their savior. As he looked at his daughter and the situation around him, he knew it. She was the savior. And that meant that man up there was the harbinger of destruction also mentioned in the prophecy. When his sealing completed, Minato knew that the control he had over the Kyuubi would slip, and although it wouldn't be permanent, it would long enough for his daughter to become an adult and finally kill this man. That would be that proudest moment of his life. He ignored Kushina's protests to his plan, already going through the hand seals and telling her to have faith in their daughter. At any other time, he would have been in stark protest to dying. But now, seeing his beautiful wife, his wonderful son, and his beautiful daughter, the chosen child, he felt that his sacrifice for them was a beautiful thing that he would not mind doing. He would make sure that they survived. Because that is what a good father and husband did. Shiki Fujin, he said loudly, as the disturbing and frightening god of death appeared behind him. He felt the cold, miserable arm of death enter his body, worming its way through his insides and finding the darkest corners of despair in his mind. It was truly horrific, and to think that he would be feeling this all in due time. He heard Kushina yelling at him as he picked up his daughter. Why? Why are you sacrificing Haruki to save the village and the country? Why are you sacrificing yourself for me? Minato closed his eyes. I can't just turn my back on my country. That's as bad as abandoning a child. You should know, when you saw your own country fall apart, and you were left without a home. And you know that we are a family of shinobi. And it's not just for you. It's for Haruki as well. I need you to be there to raise her, and Naruto as well. There are things she needs to learn about being a Jinchuriki, things that only you can tell her. I wouldn't be a proper substitute. Minato turned his back on her, facing Kyuubi and the Uchiha on top of its head. Dying to make a better life for his children. That's the stuff you should let the father handle. Kushina's eyes widened. Minato had already begun. They had set up a barrier around the forest that he had teleported the Kyuubi to, in order to prevent the Kyuubi and Madara from escaping. He rushed forward, the Shinigami's arm extending to meet with the Kyuubi. Curse you, Yoname Hokage, said the Kyuubi and Madara simultaneously as the hand entered the fox's body. The Kyuubi and Minato engaged in an intense battle of wills, the fox's heavy chakra threatening to overwhelm the Hokage. The Hokage had abandoned the idea of sealing just half of the Kyuubi inside Haruki, and now concentrated his full effort on sealing the whole thing. A resounding ripping sound was heard throughout the battlefield, as a hazy, bluish silhouette of the fox came into view. And now for the sealing! Minato yelled as he summoned forth the ceremonial sealing platform. Minato manipulated the soul of the Kyuubi so that it was facing the baby on the platform. Kyuubi raised its paw, preparing to go in for a deadly strike towards the child. Too late. The Kyuubi's soul became severed from its body as Minato completed pulling it out. In a split second, the now useless body of the Kyuubi fell to the ground, turning a sickly shade of purple. Madara jumped to safety on a nearby tree after the collapse of the great Titan beast, clutching his Rasengan injury feverly. Kushina and Naruto watched as Minato pushed the essence of the Kyuubi into their newest family member. The soul rippled out in all directions, and Haruki began screaming during the entire ordeal. As the sealing completed, Haruki stood stock still, almost as if she were dead. Her parents felt an overcoming sense of dream enter the fiber of their being, until finally the baby began to stir again. A familiar spiral seal appeared on the girl's navel, but there were absolutely no whisker marks or anything else to remind them of what had happened this evening. Minato smiled down at his daughter. The seal worked. She was alive and her mother and brother were still alive. Everything was perfect except for... Minato's eyes snapped open. He had forgotten about Madara. And it looked like the Shinigami wasn't going to wait any longer to collect his soul. The god of death floated over, closing the distance between itself and the mortal. Minato stood speechless. In front of a true god, his power meant nothing. There was no chance he would be able to stop Madara now. He waited for the contractions in his body and for the Shinigami to tear out his soul. He knelt down, praying to Kami-sama to give him more time. More time for him to stop Madara. And then, nothing happened. The Shinigami's arm was being removed from his body, and it wasn't leaving with his soul. What had happened? Had his prayer been answered? He looked up to see the god looking at him in pure distaste. You are not what I am in the mood for. Its deep, booming voice echoed throughout the perimeter, even though only Minato was able to hear it. What, he said. He turned his head to see the Shinigami float right past him, completely ignoring his speech. Kushina was giving him a strange look, and a look of impregnable hope that Minato wouldn't be taken spread upon her face. Madara hopped onto the ground, looking livid at this new prospect. His beautiful beast had been taken from right under his nose. This wouldn't do. This wouldn't do at all. He would kill every member of the Namake's family to make sure they never interfered with his plans in the future. It was the perfect opportunity in their weakened state, as well. He began walking, before he felt a strange sensation enter his being. It was a hopeless cold, one without any trace of warmth, love, or hope. As the feeling penetrated the Uchiha's body, he writhed at the pure agony that accompanied it. He clutched his head, and then he saw the most terrifying thing that he had ever seen in his long life. It was completely ethereal, with a disgusting purple skin and long, spiky white hair. It wore robes of pure white, an array of beads wrapping around its arms and neck. 2 dark black horns stuck out of its long mane of hair. The creature was sticking its strange, tattooed arm into Madara's body. The Uchiha was so paralyzed with shock that he couldn't even cry out. He gave a spasm as the creature took a hold of his soul, and ripped it out so easily that it may have been just a flimsy piece of paper. Its deed done, the Shinigami released Madara and allowed him to flop onto the ground. It raised Madara's soul to its mouth, devouring the essence in an instant. The last thing that Madara saw when he was alive was the creature devour his soul. And then death marked the end of the madness of the man. Minato stared in silent shock as the Shinigami ripped out Madara's soul so easily. But why Madara? Why not him, the one who had made a contract with the god in the first place? Why? Was all Minato could get out as the god hovered over to him again. The Shinigami stared straight ahead, its eyes focused on no particular thing. I am a god. I get to choose whose soul is devoured in the process. The contract is just a formality, and it actually means nothing. I was simply not in the mood to eating your kind of soul today, said the Shinigami with such finality that you couldn't deny its claim to be true. But. You should count yourself lucky, mortal. You are one of the few who escaped my hold. And now, you get to live another day, and move on to the afterlife in peace. With your family, the god said calmly, as it disappeared from Minato's view. Minato sat there dumbly, his mouth slightly agape. He had just escaped death. He got to live with his family. Images of his ideal future popped into his head, and the man slowly smiling, tears of joy falling from his face. He picked up his sleeping daughter from off the platform, before making his way over to Naruto and Kushina. Kushina seemed to have an expression of joyous disbelief, and his 2-year-old son was crying. Minato/Daddy, they had said simultaneously, as they both tightly hugged their husband/father, bawling their eyes out. Minato hugged them both back, the newest member of their family being at the center of the circle. And Minato, please tell me this isn't a dream. That why you're, Kushina broke off, before she cried even harder in her husband's chest. Minato kissed his wife. Yes, Kushina. This isn't a dream. I'm alive, and I will not leave you. Our family will continue to live on, he said as Minato himself began to cry. All 3 of them then turned to the sleeping infant in her father's arms. And we have our greatest savior right here with us. She will be sure to lead to a new golden age of peace of prosperity. Minato and Kushina both smiled warmly at their newborn daughter, while Naruto adopted a look of wonder as he reached out to touch his new sister, almost wondering if she were real or not. There was one thing that bothered Minato though, and it pertained back to his sensei's speech. Haruki was surely the child of the prophecy, he knew that much. But Madara was dead. He couldn't have been the harbinger of destruction. Minato turned to look at the moon, a faraway look entering his blue eyes. Who was the harbinger of destruction then? 3 weeks later. Namake's Minato was a man who was both practical and idealistic. Any normal man would have a hard time blending both of these aspects, but Minato is no normal man. Where others failed, he shined. He maintained the perfect degree of practicality and idealism in his daily life, never straying from that path while laughing in the faces of those who doubt him. His idealism shined in times of peace, with his inherent belief that people were good at heart. He was a firm supporter of hard work and the will of fire that his three predecessors had righteously followed. His ideals and beliefs would surely continue to shape Konoha for many years in the future. He also believed in his sensei's visions. True peace could be found in the ninja system. Former enemies who would have killed each other in a heartbeat could come together and live in this new era. But this is not to say that he is impractical. In times of war, there is no room for idealism, and Minato knew this well. The blonde-haired man followed every mission the elders had given him to AT, with maximum efficiency every time. He was an integral part of the war with IWA, often being called to the front lines to deal with hordes of oncoming IWA nin. His kill count in the war was even greater than his wife's, though her kills were significantly flashier and bloodier. But thankfully, they weren't at war anymore, despite the heavy attack incurred by Uchiha Madara and the QB 3 weeks ago. Thanks to his efforts, Madara's plan was triumphantly thwarted, and the village avoided destruction. And they had gained another gift. A hero. The little blonde-haired baby who was sleeping on his desk at this very moment. His daughter Namikaze Haruki. The one he had sealed the rampaging QB into. The man couldn't help but admire her. She was the center of their family of shinobi, and of the entire village. He had announced his deed in front of the entire village, and to his great joy and relief, they had embraced her with open arms. Sounds and chants of both his and her heroism thundered throughout the village. Parties were thrown and honors were given to a brave man and his daughter. Naruto had paid a little too much attention to his newborn sister. His curiosity never ceased, and his father could never tell what was so interesting about Haruki. Well, he could tell, but there's no way a 2-year-old would ever comprehend it. Whatever the case, Naruto wouldn't stop poking the baby, his small face becoming alight with childish glee every time Haruki would react to it. And when Naruto did start poking her, that is when she would never stop crying. He didn't know what was happening with Naruto. His son has been a complete enigma ever since the attack. He was quieter, more reserved. He wasn't the bright, young ball of energy that he was before the attack. The boy had been completely shell-shocked for about a week after. Could he have been traumatized by the experience? It was understandable. Being exposed to ninja combat at such an early age could traumatize the child dramatically. But Minato was sure the boy would come around eventually. After all, they were a family of ninja. He hoped the boy would come around. His actions were starting to get annoying. Which is exactly why he had brought Haruki into the office with him this morning. To give her a break from Naruto's bothersome actions. Plus, couldn't the man spend some quality time with his newborn daughter? Jiraiya was supposed to meet him in his office today, to discuss the attack and the mechanics of the seal he had placed on his daughter. But the pervert was already a half-hour late, and Minato had a pretty good idea on what he was doing. The Hokage thought of what his teacher would say. He'd probably be happy that the harbinger of destruction was out of the way, and that the child of prophecy could lead the ninja world to a path of peace without any struggle. The office was silent, but as Minato sighed, more noise could be heard. A tap and a drumbeat. They seemed to come from someplace unknown. Another one. The rhythm became louder and more intense. A puff of smoke appeared in the middle of the room, and Minato pinched the bridge of his nose in annoyance. A nauseating smell of what seemed to be a mixture of body odor and perfume came with the smoke. A silhouette of a large man doing a ridiculous dance while singing some high-pitching lyrics was what graced Minato's eyes. Haruki fluttered opened her eyes and began to cry loudly, her screams increasing as she viewed the man in the middle. Minato closed his eyes for a moment, drowning out the obnoxious noise of both his daughter and his sensei. When he opened them, he was greeted to the sight of the white-haired man grinning down flashily at him. "What do you think of my new intro? Even better than my last one, right?" Minato sighed heartily, before reaching down to coddle his daughter. The little girl continued to cry for a few seconds, before it finally died down to some near-silent sniffles and hiccuping. Jiraiya noticed the little baby, before he grinned even wider. "So there's the little brat, eh? I'm surprised you even brought her into the office with you." Minato smiled slightly as the baby stopped sniffling and began laughing. "Well, Naruto wouldn't stop poking her. I had to give her a break from that. Not to mention, she has to meet her new godfather." Minato lifted Haruki's pink flannel shirt to expose her slightly chubby stomach. On the baby's stomach was an intricate black seal, in a spiral pattern surrounded by several strange black markings. "Is that the seal?" Jiraiya asked, scrutinizing the markings closely, his eyes scanning the seal for any sort of mistake that could have been made. "Well, I'll be. You really did seal the fox into her using the Shiki Fujin. Coupled with the Uzumaki clan's special seals to form the Hack no Fuin Shiki, it will give her the ability to access the beast's chakra in the future. That will surely help grow up to be a fine kunoichi. But what really amazes me is the fact that you survived using the Shiki Fujin. By all means, you should be dead right now, Minato. Even such a morbid question couldn't dampen Minato's good spirits, though he remembered how lucky he had been to survive on the fateful night. Feeling the cold arm of death itself reach inside your bowels and hold your very soul in a vice grip was the worst feeling in the world. It was the feeling of hopelessness, of despair. The amount of shameful relief he had felt when the Shinigami began targeting Madara instead of him was staggering. The Hokage forced a smile. I know that I should be dead after using that forbidden jutsu. That jutsu guarantees nothing but death to all of its users. But I'm not dead. The Shinigami chose to let me live, taking Madara's soul instead of mine. Jiraiya's eyes widened substantially. I didn't realize that such a thing could happen. So, Uchiha Madara is forever out of the picture, is that right? Minato grabbed a document from his stack of paperwork, making a face at it before placing it to his right. Yes, the seal of the death god is absolute. Not even that man could escape it. His hold on the Kyuubi has been permanently broken as well. The fox is now safely sealed within one of Konoha's ninja again. Minato stood up in his chair and looked Jiraiya straight in the eyes. A few months ago, you told me that the masked man, who I later found to be Uchiha Madara, was the harbinger of destruction in the prophecy told by the great Toad Sage of Mount Maiboku. Haruki is the child of prophecy, the one destined to bring peace to the elemental countries. And if Madara, the harbinger of destruction, is dead, that means that there is no one to oppose the child of prophecy anymore, right? His voice was nervous pleading, desperate for the proper answer that should be coming from Jiraiya's mouth. Jiraiya looked at his feet. His student really seemed to have faith in his daughter's abilities. It would be hard to break it to him. The tall man bit his lip, trying to find the words to say to his protege. He suddenly felt sick to his stomach. Minato sealed the Kyuubi into his daughter based on his statements. Granted, the village had taken kindly to it, but it was still quite a burden to carry. Minato, the great Toad Sage's prophecy isn't exactly clear-cut. I was simply wagering a guess as to who the child of prophecy and harbinger of destruction were. Based on his deeds, the harbinger of destruction was most likely Uchiha Madara. But I can't be sure. It's a different story with the child of prophecy. All the Toad Sage said about that was that it would be a student of mine. Jiraiya winced when Minato adopted a frown on his face. The man looked lamely down at his daughter, who was giggling happily up at him. Then he started, but never finished his sentence. Jiraiya felt even guiltier. And it's a strong possibility that your daughter isn't the child of prophecy after all. You are obviously going to ask me to teach her, which I will agree to because of my idiotic last hope that she is the child of prophecy. But the main reason your daughter isn't likely to be the child of prophecy is because she is a Jinchuriki, he explained. Minato glared at his sensei, anger becoming present in his eyes. That's it? That's the reason you believe she won't be able to save this world? Simply because she holds a demon inside of her. Part of my reasoning for sealing the Kyuubi away in her was in the hopes that she'll be able to use its power to protect the ninja world. And now you're telling me she won't be able to do that because of the demon she's supposed to use to protect anyway. Do you think she's a demon too? Yelled the Hokage. Jiraiya said nothing, his face never giving away any noticeable reaction. He was already prepared for that kind of anger from Minato. Minato sat back in his chair, out of breath from his rant. Haruki began crying, her happy mood killed by her father's anger. The Sannin held up his hand, trying to calm Minato. I do not believe Haruki is a demon, nor do I believe that it is her fault that she will not be the child of prophecy. Rather, I believe it is the ninja's world fault that she can't save them. The bijou are weapons used by the hidden villages. And the Jinchuriki are the ones who utilize those weapons. As much as I hate to say, no matter how many people accept her, no matter how the village treats her, that fact won't change. Your daughter wields some incredible power, Minato. Power that you yourself want her to use. As long as she becomes a ninja, she will have to use the Kyuubi's power for some unsavory tasks. Jiraiya paused in his speech, to view Minato beginning to breathe heavier. If a war breaks out, the council will put her at the front, as the most important weapon they have. And even you won't be able to override that. And even if war doesn't break out, she will still be involved in high-level missions. In the end, she will be involved in too many deadly and destructive tasks for me to consider her the one who will be the savior of the world, no matter how much I want her to be. Minato shook his head. It's not true. I won't let he was cut off. You won't let them? That isn't true, You are just one man, Minato, and the council has the power to override you in times of crisis, said Jiraiya, a little firmer than before. It's not true. It's not. She's the center of our family. She has to be the child of prophecy. If she isn't, why did I seal the QB in her in the first place? She's not just some weapon, she's my daughter. I won't let them use her as a weapon for their own benefit. As soon as he stopped, Jiraiya grabbed Minato by the shoulders and slammed him against the wall forcefully. Listen to me, Minato. You're the Hokage. You can't just sit here with your finger up your ass and delude yourself that your daughter is the child of prophecy, because chances are she will not be. The best thing to do is help your daughter become a real ninja, instead of the child of prophecy. The council will want to use her eventually, that fact is absolute. But what better way to help her have a happy life than to let your daughter take after you, rather than forcing this child of prophecy bullshit on her? Jiraiya said, inches away from Minato's face. Minato pushed his sensei away lightly. No, I'll protect her from the council. If she can't be the child of prophecy, she'll become Hokage at the very least. I will personally see to that. If I name her my successor, the council will be unable to interfere any longer. Then, we'll truly see if she is the child of prophecy or not. Jiraiya banged his fists on the desk. God damn it, Minato. What will it take for you to listen to me? Becoming Hokage is fair enough, but you can't proclaim her the child of prophecy when she clearly isn't. What will you do if she fails? Minato sat back in desk, a smug look upon his face. This conversation is over. I will not turn her over to the council. She will be her own ninja, and she will not be trained by you. She will be trained by me and Kushina. Jiraiya frowned, still looking unsatisfied by this answer. He stoutly turned around and opened the door to the office. I hope you know what you're doing, Minato. Minato watched the white-haired man shut the door quietly behind him, before he turned to look down at his daughter, who was still sniffling from the conflict that transpired in the room. Minato forced a grin onto his face at the sight of his daughter, gently stroking her cheek to soothe her. You are going to be the best shinobi I have ever seen before. I promise. Kushina sighed, as she tried to get her son to move. Ever since the attack, he hadn't been doing much of anything except poking his sister. He was quieter too, and the loud, vibrant toddler from before seemed like almost a mystery. There was no doubt that he had been traumatized by the events that had taken place not too long ago. She could understand, viewing lethal combat at the mere age of 2 could be traumatic. She was worried about him, that was for sure. They were a family of shinobi, which meant that Naruto would definitely become one in the future, but she didn't see how he would. The boy was absolutely tiny for his age, and if he remained traumatized by combat, he would never become a successful ninja. His chakra reserves were abysmal, and despite not knowing how much control he had over them, she knew very well that it would make no difference. She thought back to her daughter. The baby had enormous chakra reserves for a newborn, courtesy of the QB. Coupled with her former bija sealed inside, Haruki was perfect for being a ninja. But did that mean that they could ignore Naruto in favor of Haruki? She hoped not. They would at least try to give him the same training that they would give Haruki, but if he didn't progress at all, then she didn't know what they would do then. 4 years later. 6-year-old Naruto was not afraid. He was not afraid. He was not. Okay, maybe he was a little afraid. Afraid to be entering the institution that would turn him into a ninja. His father was a ninja, the Hokage in fact. His mother was a ninja as well, and second only to his father himself. Even his 4-year-old sister was being trained as a ninja. So wouldn't it be rather obvious that he would become a ninja as well? He stared up at the building. This school where future shinobi meant to serve Konoha are trained. His parents had decided to enroll him in the academy a year early, and Naruto had been dreading this day for months. His mother basically had to drag him out of bed so she could accompany him on his first day of school. The boy bit his lip, before latching himself around his mother's midsection. Kushina grinned as she felt her son wrap his arms around her stomach and grip her flak jacket tightly. He buried his head into the coarse material, refusing to look at the building again. Kushina pried his small arms off of her, bending down to grasp her son's shoulders. Now, Naruto-kun, it's not as bad as it looks. The Ninja Academy can be a fun place, and the academy instructors will be sure to help you if you are having difficulties. His mother comforted him. For some reason, it didn't ease Naruto's anxiety in the slightest. He didn't care about that. He was more concerned that he was going to become a ninja. In a few years, having experiences like that one 4 years ago would become an everyday occurrence for him. He shook himself free of those thoughts. He didn't want to think about that. Do you have to go, Ka-san? Naruto asked. Kushina smiled lightly at him. You'll be fine, Naruto. Just hold your head up high, and don't let anyone push you around. Inwardly, the woman was slightly worried for her son. He showed a lack of zeal for being a ninja. He was still the same timid boy from 4 years, proving that he never truly got over his early experience. She would have to see how he adjusted to the academy. Bending down, Kushina kissed her son on the cheek before disappeared in a puff of smoke. Naruto stared blankly at the spot where his mother once was, before nervously turning around to face the building yet again. He looked down at his schedule to see he had the room 2A, with some teacher named Yumino Irika. Around him, he vaguely noticed the other kids saying goodbye to their parents, and started eagerly shuffling into the building. He heard the bell ring suddenly as he entered the academy, the blaring noise startling him. No. He couldn't be late on his first day. The boy began to run through the halls, his small legs not letting him go very fast. His classroom was at the very edge of the academy, so it was a good 3 minutes before he finally reached the door. He could hear his teacher talking through the door, something about how they were going to proudly represent Konoha, and that they should study their hardest. He didn't really pay that much attention. He turned the doorknob slightly, and all eyes turned on him as he entered the room cautiously. The teacher looked at him expressionlessly, but he could practically feel the taunts and jeers of his classmates, even if they didn't say anything. He knew why. He was a year younger, and he was small and skinny, standing at only 3 feet tall. Not to mention he was the Hokage's son. All around the village, he knew the people criticized him. They said he was much too short and scrawny to be the Hokage's son. They took much kinder to his sister, who was healthy and tall for her age. She also didn't reject his parents' training. He just didn't get it. Why would anyone want special treatment? It just makes the merit worth less in the end. Irika tried to smile. You must be Naruto. Your father has told me all about you, the scarred Chunin laughed nervously. But you're 3 minutes late, and you've missed my introduction. Please take a seat. Irika gestured to the rows of much bigger students. As he walked down the rows, he heard one boy say, Look at that little weakling. He'll never make it as a ninja. I can't believe he was allowed to join the academy. Naruto almost glared at him, until he heard the boy's friend say, Just leave it. His father's the Hokage. Really? Then no wonder he was allowed in here. Naruto took an aisle seat in the 4th row, before laying his head down on his desk. I am not going to like it here. Minato expects several things to happen in his office throughout the course of a day. Things like paperwork, ANBU, and the occasional daimyo were all things he had gotten used to. His wife even popped even frequently to bring him lunch or keep him company. But this was the first time she had ever run into his office sweaty and out of breath. Her hair was all tangled and a mess, her flak jacket was undone, yet she seemed strangely happy at this prospect. Minato put down his cup of tea and turned to address his wife. Kushina, what's wrong? He asked. Kushina said nothing, and simply walked over to his desk, throwing paperwork off so she could see her husband in full view. Kushina? Minato asked when her face was mere inches from his own. Minato, she started, looking at the questioning expression on her husband's face. A big cheesy Uzumaki grin settled onto her face. I'm pregnant. As soon as Naruto took that seat in the 4th row, he was immediately wishing that the clock would tick faster. Yet, much to his chagrin, the clock only seemed to move slower than ever before. It was tantamount to how much he would hate it here. Irika wasn't done talking just yet, and now he was going over the many rules and regulations of Ninja Academy. Naruto absent-mindedly noticed this, but the boy was able to shrug these off quite nicely, as if he wasn't one to be affected by such things. He didn't think he'd be getting into very much trouble at this place, anyway. Naruto lazily grabbed a stack of papers when the girl directly in front of him gestured for him to take them, and passed them back after taking one and realizing that it was a syllabus. He gave the piece of paper a once-over, taking his time and struggling greatly with many words that were too big for him. As he finished reading the syllabus, the one thing that really stood out and bothered him about the information was the pure leniency they had against fights. It said that fighting would not be condoned, but it didn't mention any punishment that would be associated with it. It didn't state anything like this in words, but Naruto's mind was basically working out this: you're going to be ninja, so you'll have to get used to combat. Which was partially true, by the way, though the Ninja Academy shouldn't be condoning the use of fighting against those who will be your comrades. The Ninja Academy was already proving to be a rat hole, with boys that seemed to harass him every chance they got, and a lenient punishment system. Irika was talking again, going over something about their lesson plan for the day. They would begin with the history of Konoha, along with some basic weapon identification, and then they would break for lunch afterwards. He slumped his head down on the desk, but couldn't do that for longer than 5 minutes without Irika yelling and throwing chalk that hit him painfully in the head. Naruto would then sit back up, and much to his embarrassment, would show off his small, slightly pudgy body and a confused look on his face. The other kids in the room would laugh uproariously at his stupidity, the boys from before having extra mocking jeers on their faces. Irika would shriek at him to sit up straight and listen, but Naruto couldn't sit up fully straight without having his feet dangle in midair, which made for a very uncomfortable positioning during the long lectures. He ignored pretty much everything that Irika said, avoiding punishment by sitting up and making it seem like he was actually paying attention. But that didn't stop it from being bad. He felt the stares of those boys for every second he was in the classroom, their fierce eyes burning into his skin deeper and deeper. After what seemed like eons, the clock finally reached the allotted time and the bell rang to confirm the class's lunchtime. But Naruto wasn't so sure he was looking forward to it. It meant that he would have to spend time with his peers, which was a thought that troubled him greatly. Before that, the authority of the sensei and the classroom had held them back, but now they had no such restrictions. The other students seemed to fly from their desks, eager to eat their food and talk to their friends. But not Naruto. The small boy waited for all the other kids to file out of the class, and it wasn't until Irika-sensei was sitting at his desk grading papers that Naruto swung his stubbly legs out of the desk and began walking awkwardly towards the door. Irika, who had previously so immersed in his paperwork, finally looked up when he heard the door open for one last time. The very young Chunin put down his papers, and smiled brightly at the young Namikaze. Naruto, on the other hand, wished he could have melted away on the spot. "Oh, Naruto, I almost didn't see you leave. Your father personally dropped by the academy earlier to drop off your paperwork. Great man, he is. The finest Hokage we've ever had, I believe. I'm sure you're excited to follow in your father's footsteps, aren't you? Though, you'll never make it unless you pay attention in class." Irika laughed heartily, never giving off the impression that he too had trouble in the academy. Naruto lifted his head, but didn't turn around to face his teacher. A slight tinge of red entered the boy's cheeks. He wanted to correct his teacher's mistake, but for some reason, he couldn't. "Yes," muttered the boy with an air of finality, as he wandered out of the door. At lunch, Naruto watched as the other kids sat and played amongst themselves, trading foods and laughing on the playground. He, on the other hand, sat on a small bench to the right of the main area, quietly eating his lunch. Due to the rest of his family being ramen fanatics, it was hard to find anything that wasn't the stuff. But he had managed to scrounge up a simple ham sandwich and an apple for his first day at the academy. He wouldn't be caught dead carrying the abomination that was ramen, as Naruto vehemently loathed that tainted substance. The taste, the texture, the smell, they all drove his crazy. He wanted to puke at the mere sight of the poison, but due to the fact that he was around it so much, he guessed he had built up a sort of immunity to it. A small smile came onto his face as he remembered that Haruki had cried for an hour when she had spilled her ramen one day, but the memory was cut off as he saw a large, to him, shadow fully enter his vision. Naruto looked up, a voice in his mind telling him that this wasn't going to end well. Standing directly in front of him were 3 boys, the same ones that whispered those insults at him during class. Naruto folded back into the bench, trying to appear as small as possible under the sneers of the much larger boys. The boy in the middle, who seemed to be their leader despite being the smallest, had a few choice words to say about the young Namikaze. "Hey, you're the Namikaze kid, Hokage-sama's son, aren't you? Being from that family, I wondered what kind of super child prodigy would be joining the academy, but it turns out you're just some scrawny little kid unworthy to be a ninja." The bully raised his fist, and brought it straight down onto Naruto's cheek. The 6-year-old gasped in pain, before being hurled from the bench to on the grass. His food was ripped from his hands, and made a nice decoration all over his clothes. He reached up to his face, feeling the scuff mark that the bully's fist had created. Naruto didn't have time to take any sort of counteraction, and he was immediately afterwards lifted from the ground by his collar, locking eye contact with the bully and dangling almost a foot off the ground. The bully continued. "My dad spent his entire life working hard to become a great ninja, and you couldn't imagine how proud he was to learn that I was capable of becoming a ninja. It's a lot different from you, who is only here in the first place because you're Hokage-sama's kid. A spoiled brat who doesn't deserve the Namikaze name," the bully roared. Naruto turned his head, trying to hide the fear in his eyes as the other 2 kids began cracking their knuckles threateningly. The leader bully dropped Naruto onto the ground roughly, and began to imitate his lackeys. They hovered over Naruto like menacing giants, with an evil glint in their eyes and their fists outstretched. Naruto attempted to shield his face with his arms, but it did next to nothing against the fierce onslaught that was to come. Just stay calm. Nothing happened to me during school today, Naruto muttered to himself. The boy managed to avoid a severe beatdown, but couldn't avoid numerous bruises, as well as a few cuts on the face and a swollen lip. He was currently standing outside his house, the Namikaze compound, considering his father refused to live in the Hokage mansion. Regardless, the building was still one of the biggest buildings in the village, dwarfed only by the Hokage mansion and the Hyuga compound. Naruto especially thought it was a bit overkill, since only 4 people, not including their ANBU guards, lived in the estate. Speaking of which, there were 2 of them right now outside the entrance, their masks not giving away their true feelings. He didn't know if they had noticed him yet, but if they did, they didn't seem to mind that he was doing nothing more than linger outside the entrance to his house. The 6-year-old straightened his posture so it didn't look like he was hunched over in pain. He smiled a wide grin, one that looked so out of place, yet it hid his injured lip from view. He walked through the strong wrought iron gate to the main complex. As he approached, the ANBU guards that were stationed there bowed to him. Naruto highly doubted they actually held that level of respect for him. He entered the doorway, and the first thing that struck him was the lack of noise. Usually, this was a bustling home, with sounds and voices all mixed together. Sure, his father would surely still be at his office doing the always dreaded paperwork, but his mother should have at least been home. The small boy entered the main living room, and noticed the extra ANBU guards all over the grounds outside of the house. But his mother and the usual servants were nowhere to be seen. He supposed the servants had retreated to their section of the compound for now, but where was his mother? He stared off into space, not knowing what to think, that he didn't even notice a strange-shaped object heading straight towards him. The thing smacked him on the face, eliciting a high-pitched grunting noise from Naruto's mouth. The object fell towards the ground immediately, and Naruto reached down to pick it up. It was a large teddy bear, worn a little with age but not old enough to be considered an antique. Ha ha ha! I gotcha, Oni-chan. Naruto recognized the voice immediately, placing down the teddy bear to look at his sister. Namikaze Haruki was a sprightly young girl, always happy and eager to do her best in the world of ninja that their parents were exposing her to. Her blonde hair was out of its usual ponytail, hanging loose past her shoulders. She wore a loose-fitting white shirt and a small blouse, similar to her mother's clothes when she was younger. This was proof that she would be training today, as on days off she usually wore dresses. Whereas Naruto was small and scrawny, Haruki had a more healthy body and complexion. Her skin was a healthy tan, and despite being barefoot, she already stood just as tall as Naruto. Naruto grinned weakly. That would explain the extra ANBU guards stationed all over the place. Haruki's grin turned into a frown as she saw her brother's forced smile. Are you okay, Oni-chan? She asked. Naruto's grin flattened slightly, as he saw the worried look on Haruki's face. She knew something was wrong with him, and he didn't want to come off as even weaker. I am fine, Haruki-chan, the boy stuttered, pleading to whatever gods there were that his spacey sister would believe it. The girl put her hand on her chin, making a loud humming noise while appearing to be deep in thought. After a few seconds, his contagious smile was back on her face. Okay, she chirped before the little girl bounded off towards the center of the living room to play with her toys. Naruto sighed in relief. It was already humiliating enough that his younger sister was already the same size as he was, but he didn't need to give off the impression that he was weaker than her too. The quiet boy went into their large kitchen and shut the door behind himself, blocking both the sight and sounds of Haruki. He took a seat at the counter and laid down his head on the cold, marble table. He bit his lip. What was he doing? A thick bubble of shame arose within his stomach. Shame for his fear for the ninja world when his sister stood against the deadly occupation, eager to train and learn. Shame for his body which was so small and weak it didn't even belong on a 4-year-old. He didn't deserve to be born into this family, and that realization all came crashing down on him at once. If he couldn't even handle the ninja academy, he had no right to even become a ninja. He didn't have the will. The boy didn't even flinch for over an hour. He had decided he would do nothing more than quietly wait for one of his parents to get home. The boy finally lifted his head up as he heard the slamming of the front door, followed by loud and hearty laughter by 2 individuals. He also heard Haruki shriek in joy, knocking something over before thundering over to where the laughter was. He meekly opened the kitchen door and stepped out into the open, where he was greeted by the sight of his parents. His father, still wearing his patented Hokage robe, was holding up his mother bridal style, with both of them having huge grins on their faces. Their grins widened when Haruki ran up to hug Minato around the stomach, and widened even further when Naruto stepped out of the kitchen. The husband and wife pair kissed each other, before Minato finally let Kushina down onto the floor. Haruki was confused at this odd behavior, after showing her distaste for the kiss, of course. Usually, her mommy and daddy would come home separately, or if they did come home together, her daddy wouldn't be carrying her mommy. Kushina walked over to the main part of the living room, decided to rest her tired body on one of the couches. Minato smiled softly, beckoning for both Naruto and Haruki to come sit with them. Haruki rushed over to sit on the couch, leaning against her mother as she sat. Minato kept the grin on his face, watching as his wife stroked her long, blonde hair. Haruki closed her eyes, her breathing slowing to a rhythmic beat. He then looked over at his son, who had slowly walked right past him to sit adjacent to Kushina. Minato looked at the rest of his family, and closed his eyes softly, making his way over to where the rest of his family was sitting. He stopped at the foot of the couch, and then wrapped his arm around Kushina. "Naruto, Haruki, your mother and I have a very important announcement to make," he muttered lowly, and Kushina smiled at him as he did. She lifted her hands off of the now paying attention Haruki, and placed them on top of Minato's hands. "Yes," she said softly. "It turns out that we're going to have another baby. You two are going to have a little brother or sister." Dead silence rang throughout the room, and both Naruto and Haruki looked gobsmacked at the revelation. Naruto slid down the couch, breathing heavily and his eyes wide in shock. Haruki retained that dumbfounded look on her face, before a wide grin split onto her face, and she squealed to the heavens in glee. She crawled onto her mother's lap before the woman could even react, getting right in her face with numerous questions. Mommy! Mommy! Is it true? I'm gonna have a little brother or sister? When are they coming? Is it in your tummy right now? Can I feel it?" she asked rapidly, next to no pause appearing in her massive amount of questions. Kushina laughed. "Yes, dear, he's in my tummy right now, and he should appear in about 8 months or so," she answered, and Haruki whined in disappointment. Kushina laughed again. "You'll just have to be patient, honey. It takes a while for a baby to be delivered. But enough about that. You know what time it is. It's time for mommy and daddy to take you outside to train," Kushina said, bracing herself for the oncoming yay. "Yay! Training! Training!" True to Kushina's thoughts, the girl immediately brightened up at the prospect of training, immediately running over to the back door that led to the personal Namake's training grounds. Minato and Kushina laughed and kissed, before following their daughter arm in arm outside. Before they exited, Minato turned around one last time to talk to Naruto. "Naruto, always remember that you have the same training options as Haruki does, and will gladly give you those. We can start right now if you want," Minato said, his voice significantly more subdued. But Naruto merely thrust his head into the couch and said nothing, wanting to appear as small as possible. Minato and Kushina frowned, and Kushina whispered something to her husband as they walked outside. Naruto heard his mother say one last thing before they fully disappeared. "All right, Naruto, make sure you run upstairs and do your homework. We'll be back inside before dinner. I'm making ramen tonight," she added as an afterthought. Naruto gagged a little. Naruto had dragged himself off to his room a little later, wanting to avoid the intense sounds of cheering that were coming from outside. He threw his backpack over to the side as soon as he entered his room and, to his great annoyance, he could see his sister and parents going over a whole bunch of taijutsu stances through the window. To his ire, she got them almost immediately, earning infernal applause from his parents. He slumped down on his bed. He didn't know why he was thinking that way about his sister. It wasn't her fault that he was afraid of being a ninja, but the whole thing was just plain infuriating to live through. He arose from his bed after a couple minutes, deciding to go into the house's study to avoid dwelling on this too much. He picked up his homework, some continuation of the basic weapon identification they had gone over this morning. He didn't quite understand it, and Naruto figured that there would be valuable information on it in the study. He grabbed his utensils and paper, and headed out down the hallway, apologizing as he accidentally bumped into one of the maids. The study was at the very end of the mansion, past his parents' bedroom. It was a comforting room, with its rustic wooden floors and walls. Numerous shelves held many books on almost every subject imaginable, a direct result of his father being the most powerful man in the village. He heard one last shriek from Haruki, before he shut the door behind him and blocked out all noise. His brain was throbbing from all the stress, and he didn't want to have any more issues to deal with. "Easy, Naruto. This is the study, it's quiet and away from any problems. I can take my time in here and calm myself slowly. Just find a book on ninja weapons and I can get this over with already," he thought. He placed his materials down on his father's study desk and began browsing through the wide variety of books available on the shelves. He shuffled through a book on Katon Jutsu before he finally found a book similar to what he was looking for. But the book next to it is what dragged his attention from it. It was a gold-bound tome, complete with ornate writing and design. It felt greatly out of place with the rest of the books in there, with their simple design and worn-out covering. But this one, it looked very old, but seemed to carry its age well. He traced his finger across the gold title along the spine of the book, feeling a sort of connection with the words. The 9 Bijou. He sounded out the title, and it felt smooth and right coming out of his mouth. He looked around to see whether anyone was watching, before greedily snatched the book from his case and hurrying back to the desk. He slammed the book down on the wood, and it practically seemed to open by itself. It landed directly on the introduction, and despite his eagerness to read it, Naruto hesitated. He didn't know why, but this book gave off a bad vibe. Like the information held within this tome was something he didn't want to know. Nevertheless, curiosity stained Naruto's conscience long enough, and as soon as he read the first word, the small boy couldn't stop. He read through the words at a slow rate, morbidly fascinated by the beings described in these pages. And, as soon as he finished the introduction and flipped the page, he was greeting to a fairly lifelike drawing of a large, distended yellow tanuki, ugly, blue veins coursing through the creature's entire body. It was drawn standing in a forest, its wide mouth opened in an expression of drunken glee. Several trees were being crushed underneath the creature's massive body weight. There was a caption with a title at the bottom of the page, one that read Ichibi. And so, Naruto read about the Ichibi, the Nibi, the Sanbai, the Yambi, and he was halfway through reading about the Gobi when his mother called him for dinner. After a long, unpleasant dinner, Naruto was back in his room, reading the precious material that seemed to captivate him. He read through the rest of the Gobi section, then about the Rokubi, Nanabai, and Hachibi. But as he came across the picture of the last Bijou, the great fox Kyubi, he froze. He dropped the book on the floor, its page being strewn in the wind. He clutched his head in agony, whimpering slightly as all the repressed memories came swarming back to him. There was barely anything that Naruto had remembered at that fateful night, yet he remained traumatized over the years. All he remembered was an orange-masked man and 9 long swishing tendrils. But now that terrible picture, of the evil 9-tailed fox, made him remember more. More specifically, the fox itself. He remembered it, in all its fearsome glory, outside the village of his home. Its devastating attacks ripped through everything in sight. He remembered hiding behind his mother, as his father rushed to engage the beast in mortal combat. He remembered the fear he had felt that time. All of it. Naruto gave a big lurch, and fell onto the ground with a loud thud, as all the horrible memories came back to him at once. He had landed next to the book, and Naruto's mind screamed at him not to read anymore. But despite all his reluctance, the boy couldn't keep away. He read through all of the Kyubi section, becoming more and more horrified with every passing word. This was the beast that was considering a natural disaster, one that no mortal man could defeat. He turned the last page to the Kyubi section, breathing heavily but still noticing that there was more. The epilogue section covered some more minor details, and as soon as Naruto closed the book, he felt sick to his stomach. He struggled to his feet, looking out the window as he placed the book on his bed. There was a full moon out tonight, and the book mentioned something about the Ichibi being the most active during it. If there are things like that out there in the world, then I definitely don't want to become a ninja, Naruto whispered to himself. There was more to the book that had bothered him than the Kyubi. The fact that the epilogue had mentioned that these beings were often sealed into humans that could use their power. These humans, that always became ninja, were called Jinchuriki, and the second thing, the epilogue had also made mention of a Jubi, but beyond that single word, there had not been a shred of information about what that was. Naruto weakly picked up the golden book, deciding to bring it back to the study. It was late, and Naruto would dwell on what this meant for him in the morning. Apparently, the ninja world was a lot deeper than he gave it credit for. The thought was scary. Naruto crept out into the dark hallway, looking for any signs of a person. He sighed in relief. The servants as well as Haruki had already gone to bed, and the only light came from a cracked door near the end of the large house. That was his parents' room. He crept over the entrance of the study, which was in fact right next to his parents' room. He knew they could sense a chakra signature or something, but he prayed that they weren't able to now. He waited outside the door for a while, knowing that if he turned the knob to the study door, then he would be giving himself away to highly capable ninja like them. 15 minutes, and his parents still hadn't gone to bed. He rested his head in his lap, but shook awake when he heard his father mutter something. He strained his ears to hear, and was able to pick up on what his father was saying. But he wasn't sure he wanted to. Don't know what we're going to do with him. He doesn't even want to be a ninja, Naruto heard, and he already knew they were talking about him. I don't know if he's even capable of even becoming one. His chakra reserves are small, and the only thing that will make him a capable ninja is will, which is something that he clearly lacks. That was his mother talking. Let's just hope the new baby takes more after Haruki. As much as we love him, Naruto's attitude and appearance isn't very well liked outside the family. People seem to think he's disgracing the Namake's family ever since it got out that he's afraid of being a ninja. He heard Kushina agree with him after that. Naruto almost stopped breathing after hearing that. He knew that his reputation around the village wasn't golden, but he didn't think that would rub off his family. So my family, they're being disgraced because of me. Naruto wasn't entirely shocked at this news. After all, that boy who had beat him today surely seemed to think that was the case. But for it to be extended throughout a large portion of the village. Naruto bit his lip. He didn't want his family to suffer because of his fear. That was low. He would definitely become a ninja, no matter how much he didn't want to. He did have the will to make it so his family's name isn't tarnished. He wasn't weak anymore, and he wasn't about to let his traumatization take over his entire life. He would become a ninja. Though Naruto wouldn't know until later how hard it really was to suppress one's true feelings. I don't think it really matters that much. Haruki is going to be the heiress of both the Namake's family and Uzumaki clan no matter what. After all, she is a Jinchuriki, and she is taking after me and carrying the Kyuubi. Not to mention all that stuff you believe about the prophecy. Naruto slapped his hand over his mouth, in order to prevent himself from gasping. Haruki was the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. What's more, his mother was the previous Jinchuriki of it. What the hell? Minato seemed to agree with him, sealing the finality of the statement. His sister was the Jinchuriki of the Fox, and she was destined to become the heiress of the two clans. No matter what he did, that fact would never change. The lights finally turned off, signifying that his parents had gone to sleep. But Naruto sat there stock still, trying to digest the new information that had just been given to him. Naruto didn't know why he had never learned about his sister's burden. He supposed it was just common knowledge around the village, yet maybe he was just too young to learn about the secret of the Kyuubi. Naruto regretted opening that book now, because then he would have never understood the terms Kyuubi and Jinchuriki. He was 6 years old, god damn it. He didn't need to know about such horrible things yet. And, as he looked at his sister smile and laugh, he wondered if she didn't know about the great being residing within her at that very moment. The whole discovery made him view his sister in a different light. It wasn't anything like hatred, or that he believed Haruki was the fox. No, it was a different kind of feeling. A stranger feeling. Was it jealousy? Naruto didn't know, but why would he feel jealous that his sister held such a terrible being? The thought confused him greatly, sort of like as if he weren't acting like himself. Maybe it was because of that one thing, that one little thing that Haruki didn't even choose for herself, that her life was so great. People around the village treated her like a god, he realized. She was surrounded by two loving parents who would do anything for her. She had never been sick in her life, and to top it all off, she was now the heiress to the family even though it was his birthright. There was also that slight bit of fear now, knowing that if she ever called upon that power she could crush him in an instant, no matter how great of a ninja he became. God, he was pathetic, being afraid of his baby sister. But he had resolved to become a ninja after what he had heard in his parents' bedroom, but nothing seemed to be paying off for him. He didn't feel any stronger or more skilled, while his sister seemed to be advancing in leaps and bounds under his parents' tutelage. He supposed it was because of his parents, but even if he did resolve to become a ninja, by no means did he want any special treatment. It would just mean that he had good teachers, and didn't do any of this himself. No one else his age seemed to be afraid of his sister, Naruto noted, but he doubted they knew what was inside of her. Even today, when all of her friends were over for her 5th birthday party, they laughed and played with her, oblivious to what was on the inside. He had retreated away from the group of 4- and 5-year-olds soon after they had arrived. His mother, now heavily pregnant, supervised the group of children with several other parents, and hadn't even noticed him slip away from the crowd. Haruki, on the other hand, was having the time of her life. She had received several nice presents from her family and friends, including one nice surprise from Jiraiya, who had told her that he would help her parents with training her when she became a genin. The little girl had squealed in delight at that, while several of her friends looked on jealously at the lucky girl. She had latched onto Jiraiya after that, causing the pervert to humorously try and pry her off his leg. "Come on, everyone! Let's go outside and play ninja!" the girl exclaimed as she finished opening her presents. The other kids cheered, following their friend out to the back door. The adults laughed as they saw lazy Nara Shikamaru unenthusiastically walk outside last. Minato, who had just come back from the kitchen with refreshments for the adults, nearly dropped them as he saw his little daughter bound outside with all her friends. "Wait, Haruki!" he called out to her, thrusting out a hand as soon as he put the beverages down on the table. "There's one more special surprise you need to be told," he yelled as she passed through the door. "It can wait, Daddy. I want to play ninja now. Ninja! Ninja!" she called back, unconcerned of her father's plight. Minato sighed as Shikamaru shut the door behind them, exasperated by the child's temperament. Kushina sauntered up to him, giggled as she held her pregnant belly. "She's quite a handful, isn't she?" she said as she leaned in to kiss her husband. Minato smiled back at her and returned the kiss, his previous emotions giving way to laughter. "She sure is. I don't think she realized that this was probably the most important thing." "Haruki's right, Minato. The party isn't over yet, and it can wait until the children come back inside," Kushina said, looking fondly out the window to the children who had just started playing. "Ha ha! I gotcha!" Haruki cried as she hit the young Inuzuka Kiba with her cardboard shuriken. He had taken to hiding behind a tree in the Namake's personal training, when his hiding spot was given away by Chuji again. "Ah, nice job, Chuji. You blew my cover again," Kiba shouted at the large boy, but from the smile on his face it was clear that he was having fun anyway. Haruki giggled back at her two friends, before slinging her arm around her best friend Hyuga Hinata, who blushed from being put on the spot. She was clearly the polar opposite of Haruki, but for some reason the two had struck a chord in each other's hearts. The four kids heard some more shouting in the distance, and it was apparent that someone else had been caught. "Come on, Hinata-chan, let's go! We're definitely going to catch more people, and won't let the others outdo us," she shouted and was about to leave the three of them in the dust. "Hey, look!" Kiba said suddenly, stopping Haruki from going somewhere else. There, on the second floor of the Namake's mansion, visible from the third window from the left, was a small, blonde-haired boy, slightly shrouded by the window's curtains. Haruki turned to see where Kiba was pointed, a glazed look in her eyes appearing. "Oniai-chan," she said distantly. Over the past few months she had noticed that her brother was becoming more and more distant, and quite frankly, the thought made her very sad. Naruto seemed to notice that they were staring at him, and he quickly ducked out of view. "It's your weird brother, Haruki," said Kiba bluntly, laughing a little at the thought of the young blonde's personality. Her friends usually tried to avoid talking about her brother, as they knew what reaction it stirred from Haruki. Kiba was a different case, however. Haruki glared at him weakly for his barbed insult of her brother. "I've never seen him before," commented Chuji. Kiba snickered, knowing exactly the reason. "That's 'cause he goes up to his room every time one of us comes over here. It's completely different than the way you act, Hinata. At least you are friends with us and do things with us, but he never even talks to any of us. I think he's ashamed of something," Kiba said, a grin coming onto his face at his brilliant theory. "What are you saying?" Kiba said Haruki a little more forcefully. "My mom says that your brother's a disgrace to your family. Your mom and dad might think that way too, seeing that he doesn't even want to become a ninja in a family that creates incredible shinobi. She thinks that he's undeserving of the Namake's name." "But, Naruto and Ai-chan, not wanting to become a ninja," Haruki stuttered, almost refusing to believe it. It was the first time in a while since anybody had ever gotten under her skin like that. Kiba held up his hands defensively. "Hey, I'm just telling you what my mom thinks. No need to get so worked up over it." Haruki turned away from the boy, not wanting to hear more about the matter. "Let's go, Hinata," she said angrily. "We've got a game to finish." But even as she said that, Kiba's words rang in her head, and the young, impressionable girl couldn't stop the cold, dark feeling of shame rise deep within her stomach. Minato was very surprised when his previously cheerful daughter came inside from playing in a less than happy mood. The other kids seemed painfully oblivious to their friend's behavior, and continuously harassed and played with each other. Only little Inuzuka Kiba and Hyuga Hinata seemed to notice the change that occurred in his daughter. For that, he was at least thankful. Kushina looked at him awkwardly, seeming to notice the same thing as he did. The Yamanakas seemed to be whispering to themselves something, and he had a strange feeling that it had something to do with his daughter's sudden mood change. The other children seemed to go sit with their parents or guardians, leaving the birthday girl to wander on up to both him and Kushina. She stood there about 3 feet in front of him, her fists clenched and her eyes pointed towards the ground. Haruki, Kushina began cautiously. "Are you ready for your last big surprise?" Haruki seemed to brighten up slightly at that, and looked at her mother with big, curious eyes. "Well, I think it's best to let your father explain this to you," Kushina said, passing the buck off to her husband. Minato bent down to her knees, placing his hand on top of his daughter's head fondly. The little girl closed her eyes and smiled lightly as she enjoyed the feel of her father's strong, warm hand on her head. Minato grinned widely, feeling such immense pride in her. Haruki, ever since your brother entered the academy a year early, I believe it's necessary for it to become a tradition in this household. And while you may have noticed that Naruto isn't exactly, inclined to become a ninja. Haruki felt like a stone was just dropped into her stomach. I believe you'll have a much greater disposition, and fare much better as a ninja than your brother. Minato felt slightly awkward at such a blatant show of favoritism, and even Haruki seemed to notice that there was something wrong. He had expected his daughter to be beaming at him right now, but instead he saw that the girl's cheeks were slightly flushed, and she seemed tense. Minato stood to his full height, adopted the fake persona of the stern, yet benevolent Hokage. Namikaze Haruki, by order of the village of Konoha, I have hereby enrolled you in the academy so that you may study the art of the ninja and serve this village to the best of your ability. Minato couldn't keep a smile off his face as he saw his daughter's look of wonder grow. From directly upstairs out of sight, a small figure watched the parents cheer and the children throw fits of jealousy, and all that he could do was scowl. Weeks passed by as the academy got out for the year, leaving Naruto to stay at home on break. While before Naruto saw Haruki in a new light, it was also that Haruki saw Naruto in a new light. She never forgot the words Kiba had spoken to her at the birthday party, but every time she saw her brother's face, she had to ask herself whether he really was bringing shame upon their family. Some days she hated him, but on most days she just felt sorry for him. He hadn't looked like he had improved a single bit in his first year at the academy. It was truly pitiful. She was beginning to lose faith in him. Haruki did in fact love her brother, and the days when he was on break from the academy, he wasn't as surly, and he didn't retreat out of sight. He would go up to their mother every night and listen to her belly, which was an action that made the pregnant woman smile. Her mother was due for her third child any day now, and unknown to Haruki, she would be able to deliver like a normal woman now, considering she no longer carried the kyubi. While her mother was preparing for the birth, her father was preparing all the paperwork that would get her into the academy. It wasn't that difficult of a process, since he was the Hokage and had total power when it came to the military of the village. It was the last night before they were to begin academy classes, and Naruto had grown increasingly more moody as the night went on. He didn't even touch his dinner that night, but it was ramen after all. He just sat there at the table, staring at his empty bowl and the large pot of the stuff that the rest of the family was devouring without mercy. And then, out of nowhere, he saw his mother make a very strained face, before rising from her chair and clutching her swollen belly. Naruto's eyes widened, and he had a strange feeling what was happening. Minato seemed to sense it as well, rising from his chair shortly after Kushina did with an alarmed expression on his face. Kushina? Is it? Minato trailed off, leaving his question unfinished. Kushina looked slightly panicked now, and was clutching her stomach in agony at the contraction. She rushed over to her husband, and glared at him while grabbing his Hokage robes forcefully. Yes, Minato. I'm having the damn baby. So stop spacing out and get me to the hospital this instant, she shouted. Minato freaked out at that, though not as much as he did for the first and second time. He danced about like a madman, shouting random instructions to his kids and trying to soothe his wife. He considered calling the ANBU and having them use Shunshin to get her to the hospital. However, there might be too much of a jolt for a pregnant woman to take. The only option right now was to carry her to the hospital on foot. Minato grunted slightly as he picked up the pregnant woman, who was thrashing slightly but was fully aware of what was going on. With his wife in tow, Minato headed for the front door, a no-nonsense look on his face. Naruto, Haruki, you two will probably have to stay here with the ANBU overnight. I will likely be at the hospital all night and through tomorrow, so you'll have to get to school on your own. Naruto, since you're older, make sure to show your sister what to do on her first day, understand? Naruto nodded shyly, to which Minato smiled. Good. Once school is over, I'll come get you and take you to the hospital, and you'll see whether you have a new brother or sister yet. As his father rushed out of the door carrying his pregnant mother, Naruto felt like he was almost in a daze. Naruto didn't think that he'd be the one who woke up his sister the next day. In fact, he believed that it would be at 6 in the morning when his younger sister came bounding into the room like the high-energy girl she was, and raucously wake him up by pounding him. But that wasn't the case. His lackluster attempt to get out of bed was just a sorry excuse for not wanting to go back to the ninja academy. Just because he was resolved to become one to protect his family's image didn't mean he didn't have feelings of doubt or reluctance. It was just another type of resolve. He grumbled as he walked out into the hall and down towards his sister's room near the edge of the stairs. He opened the door, feeling the familiar musty smell wash all over him. Even as a 5-year-old girl, Haruki had no such desire to fill her room with frilly things or anything pink in nature. Instead, her room was adorned with posters, scrolls, and the occasional faux weapon hanging on the wall. A giant banner displaying the kanji for determination hung over the front of her bed, and the wooden floors held a giant rug that was of the spiral that always was on the village's flak jackets. That was not to say it was without toys. Her closet was littered with Haruki's beloved playthings, and several of them were thrown out all over the floor. Naruto resisted the urge to complain about the mess, but stopped and then resisted the urge to laugh as he viewed his sister's ridiculous sleeping position. Her body was thrown all over her bed, with her arms and legs spread way apart from each other. She was wearing her favorite pajamas today, which were a soft lavender color with pictures of steaming ramen bowls, which looked ridiculous in itself. Her long blonde hair was all tangled and messy, and a little bit of drool was leaking out of his open mouth onto her pillow. Naruto creeped up over to the bed, a slight creak in the floor the only noise he was making. He rustled her slightly, then harder when he received no reaction. Moni-chan? She muttered as she dizzily saw her brother standing over her. As too early. See come back in a few hours, she grumbled, as she laid down on her side. Did you forget, Haruki? Today's your first day at the academy. Classes begin in an hour, and Anbu-san downstairs says to get ready as soon as possible. Haruki sat up in her bed and frowned. Her brother wasn't being his usual meek self today. Maybe it was the birth of another sibling that had gotten him so agitated today. She wondered that as she flung her legs out from the bed, and noticed that Naruto had already left the room. The two siblings ate breakfast in near silence, both still tense with each other, and both still tense about the arrival of the new baby. Naruto finished first, setting his dishes in the sink and grabbing his schedule. He walked over to the door where the Anbu was ready to see them off, looking slightly annoyed with Haruki for her lagging. After 10 more minutes of waiting, which was by the way beginning to get on both Naruto and the Anbu guard's nerve, Haruki finally appeared at the front door, clothed in a small, little dress, and her sour, morning mood permanently evaporated. She waved to the Anbu giddily, who then proceeded to open the door for the two children. Haruki slung her backpack over her shoulder in a mimic of Naruto, and eagerly noted the sights of the village in the morning. As they walked through the streets of the village, Haruki skipped and bounded along excitedly, while Naruto dropped his pace down to a slow waddle, slouching over slightly as he walked. Haruki would grab his arm and beckon him over once she found something she liked, which would distract them yet again from their necessary destination. Oni-chan. That nice old lady over there always gives me candy when I come over to her shop, she said excitedly, grabbing her brother's hand and leading over to the small stand where the lady was. Oba-san! Haruki called over to the lady, who turned and seemed to be delighted by the girl's presence. Oba-san! Good morning! She cried as she finally reached the stand, brother in tow. The old, wrinkled woman of about 70 smiled warmly at the young Namake's girl, before her eyes set on Naruto, and her smile faded a little and an unreadable expression entered her eyes. Everyone in the village knew about the first child of the Namakes, the scrawny, meek boy who seemed to have issues with being a ninja. Anyone with a brain enough knew that Naruto had a much higher chance of making Hokage, or at least a very high position of power within the village, simply due to his heritage. That seemed to set their nerves on end. Someone like him holding so much political power? It was kind of a bitter feeling, especially knowing that Haruki was such a better alternative, but would be less inclined to be anything because of her birth order. Of course, the woman didn't know that the title of Namake's heir had been switched in recent years. Oba-san! Oba-san! Haruki said, pounding her hands on the stand. This is my Ni-chan. Have you met him before? She asked. The old woman turned a slightly frosty gaze on the young girl, which threw the girl for a loop as the old woman was usually so amiable. No, we haven't met before, Haruki-chan. Though I know who the first child of Hokage-sama is, she said. Haruki frowned, and stopped beating her hands against the wood. She didn't like the tone of voice the elderly woman was taking, and all it seemed to do was perfectly validate Kiba's earlier words about her brother. She wasn't a good reader of emotions, but damned if she didn't realize that that woman had a problem with her brother. The awkward situation wasn't progressing well, so Haruki grabbed her brother's hand again and led him away from the stand. The old lady called out to her about free candy, but Haruki just ignored her. As they walked through town over to the academy, Haruki pointed out more people who seemed to look away when they spotted Naruto, or people who began whispering under their breath. An angry blush formed on her cheeks as she began to pick up speed, becoming more and more embarrassed about this the further they got into town. Naruto seemed to be feeling awkward about it as well, and he avoided her gaze when she turned back to look at him. As they entered the academy grounds, Naruto sighed in relief when he realized they weren't late, and parents escorting their children stood outside the building surrounded by a few academy instructors, chatting with them about their child's education. But that relief changed to panic as he saw all of the academy instructors and students file into the building, while the parents said goodbye to each other and went off to do their daily business. "No, we're gonna be late," cried Naruto as he broke free of his sister's grip and began running towards the school. Haruki followed closely behind him, surprised at his sudden behavior. The 5-year-old girl followed closely behind him, easily catching up to him as he approached the building. The two siblings marched through the grass, but sitting on the stairs up to the building were 3 people that Naruto didn't want to see. The 3 bullies, who had repeatedly abused his last year, were all sitting on the steps ditching class, and apparently very pleased as they all laid their eyes on him. Naruto backed up a little bit, trying to avoid a confrontation, but as he took a step back as the 3 groupies began to stand up. "Who are they?" asked Haruki subtly, righteous getting a bad feeling from those 3 much bigger boys. Bad people," said Naruto simply. "Get out of here, Haruki. I don't want you getting caught up with them too. Just run away and come back in a few minutes to see if it's clear," instructed Naruto. But Haruki didn't move. She simply stood there, eyes fixated on the 3 bullies, refusing to listen to her brother's words. "Go!" shouted Naruto. Too late. "Who's this, Namikaze? Your new girlfriend?" came the obnoxious voice of the leader bully. After hearing one of the most cliché greetings by a bully ever, the 2 Namikazes realized how big of trouble that they were in. "She's not my girlfriend, Toji. She's my sister, and she's starting her first day at the academy." Toji scrutinized the young girl, then looked at Naruto, and then at Haruki again. After a few quick once-overs, the big 8-year-old seemed to hold in his laughter for a moment, before it evolved into a full-blown laugh fest. "Ha ha! That's rich!" Toji laughed. Guys, take a close look at these 2 and tell me what you notice." He wheezed heavily, before going back to more laughter. The other 2 bullies squinted stupidly as they looked at the 2 nervous Namikazes, before they too burst out into peals of heavy laughter. Toji laughed even harder when he realized his friends had gotten it too. "And Namikaze," he pointed at Naruto in between laughter. "That girl is your younger sister." He paused to allow more laughter. "And looks bigger and stronger than you do, ha ha ha." Toji collapsed onto the ground. Both Naruto and Haruki were seething in rage. "You're an even bigger wimp than I thought." Naruto's eye began to twitch, and Haruki stared in awe as an attitude she had never seen before in him began to occur. Maybe all the emotional stress of handling these jerks was finally getting to him? Something in Naruto seemed to crack, and Naruto calmly yet eerily walked slowly over to where Toji was kneeled over in laughter. He cast as big a shadow as he could over the larger boy, who was still paralyzed from laughter. He might never get another chance like this again. It was now or never. He raised his fist in the air, breathing out of his mouth in pure rage. After what seemed like an eternity, the young brought it down on the much larger boy. The fist connected with the bully's cheek, and all the laughter was propelled out of his system as soon as he felt the forceful blow. Toji was knocked back slightly by Naruto's punch, and his face connected with the ground with an audible pounding noise. Haruki had her mouth open at the scene. Naruto was never this aggressive. She didn't know what had gotten into him. "Toji!" The other 2 bullies cried simultaneously as they watched their leader get pounded. Unfortunately, however, the lead bully was far from unconscious, and his previous laughter gave way to cold, piercing anger as he got to his feet and wiped the small snuff mark off his face. "Namikaze!" the bully roared, hoisting Naruto up by the collar of his shirt and holding him at arm's length. Naruto was beginning to seriously regret his moment of impulse, considering Toji was much more proficient in taijutsu than he was. Haruki heard a sickening crack as Naruto fell to the ground after receiving a much more devastating punch than the one he had given. Using his superior shinobi skills, Toji jumped over to where Naruto was lying prone in an instant, delivering a nasty downward punch at the fallen boy. The punch acted upon the force of gravity, and all the air was driven from Naruto's lungs. Naruto gasped for breath, and clutched the wound on his chest. Some blood got in his eye, and he was only dizzily able to see the ongoing scene through one of his eyes. "Stop it!" yelled Haruki, rushing to her brother's aid. Even in a constricting dress and sandals, Haruki's training with her mother and father paid off, and her fluid taijutsu helped her immensely as she thanked God that Toji was leaving himself wide open at that very moment. Haruki's foot implanted itself with the older boy's chin as the little girl sent him a surprisingly powerful kick upwards. The bully was separated from his prey for a moment, being disoriented from the girl's attack. "You!" Toji exclaimed angrily, not expecting the girl to attack him at all. Haruki didn't respond to Toji, instead putting up her hands in the familiar seal of the Bunshin no Jutsu. "As she already knows Jutsu?" Toji said in surprise. However, the technique widely considered to be a joke continued to remain as a joke as Toji's two groupies snuck up behind the Namikaze's prodigy. No matter how much a prodigy, she was still only 5 years old, and too inexperienced to defend against the onslaught of the two bigger and older boys. She needed more training, she realized as she was sent to the ground. Toji regained all his confidence when he saw the display from his two friends. The two boys continued to attack the poor girl, until her hair was strewn everywhere, her dress was tatters, and she was bruised in many places. Toji laughed raucously, sauntering up to the fallen girl. "Look at this closely, Namikaze. Because of your pitiful weakness, your little sister is going to suffer," he said cruelly. Naruto stared in horror as the bullies went all out on his sister, punching and kicking her with all their might. The 5-year-old cried out in pain, screaming his name and her father's name, and begging to be released from his torment. He attempted to move, but found that his legs weren't responding to his thoughts. The thoughts of Haruki being in pain allowed him to inch along in sheer determination, but he couldn't even walk in this state, let alone fight off the bullies. Naruto felt an enormous feeling of shame, and he just wanted to fall off the face of the earth at that moment. His little sister was suffering because of him, and Naruto couldn't even do anything about it. The thought was heartbreaking. What had he been doing that last year? He thought he had resolved himself to become a ninja. For one agonizing minute, the three bullies continued to torment his sister, before they finally got bored and rushed off to class, leaving Naruto and Haruki to lie there on the ground, injured. Haruki, Naruto managed to say, feeling almost unworthy to address his sister this way. Haruki was eerily silent, and was struggling to rise to her feet, brushing off her tattered dress with her face pointed to the ground. Haruki walked over to her fallen brother, his face shadowed by her messy hair. Haruki, Naruto repeated, and his mouth opened in shock and sadness. Tears were pouring from Haruki's hidden eyes, running down her little cheeks and dripping onto the ground. "Why?" she asked angrily, staring at Naruto with little more than contempt. "Why did you have to challenge that boy? Everyone around the village knows that you have no talent as a ninja, so why would you challenge him when you should know better?" Naruto's eyes widened further at his sister's angry tone. "Everyone's ashamed of you because they think that you are undeserving of the Namikaze name. And I'm starting to believe that they're right. I'm starting to become ashamed of you as well, Naruto," Haruki shrieked, for the first time not using the honorific. Haruki hobbled away from her brother after an event that would forever change her. No longer would she be the happy-go-lucky girl. Now, she would begin to take her studies more seriously. All of this had gone too far, and she had gotten beat up simply because of her brother's weakness. She would no longer be cordial with her brother. Now she would begin to resent him in a way not unlike everyone else. She was now fully ashamed of him. An hour later, Naruto would find the strength necessary to move himself from his spot, and walked into his second-year classroom feeling like a real scumbag. He was just in time to hear about a field trip later in the year. To be perfectly honest, it wasn't Minato's best day in his life. Naturally, when he had stepped out of the hospital for a bit of fresh air, one of the nurses rushed out 5 minutes later proclaiming that his wife has gone into labor. It was only natural that the man freak out after that, snapping at the nurse and then rushing into the hospital at top speed to confront his wife. But of course, he had to get lost in the long corridors of one of the places he hated most in the world, and it took him another 5 minutes to finally find the maternity ward. As he approached the door, he heard the sound of a crying baby startled him. The Hokage looked quite silly, jumping at every little noise like a fool and struggling to turn the handle to the door because his nerves were shot. "Kushina!" he cried as he finally opened the door, and was relieved to his wife sitting relaxed on the bed, a beautiful happy smile adorned on her face. She was worn out, yet very happy, the telltale sign of a successful birth. "Minato, you missed it," Kushina admonished, almost looking annoyed with her husband. But then, she weakly pointed to one of the nurses, who was carrying a small bundle wrapped up in a blanket. "Is that?" he asked rhetorically, knowing full well what it was. The nurse smiled at him. "Congratulations, Hokage-sama. Your wife has given birth to a beautiful, healthy baby," she said, readying the bundle for its father. "May I see my baby's face?" Minato asked weakly. The nurse smiled again. Of course, she replied, undoing the blankets that unveiled the baby's face. Congratulations. It's a girl. Naruto didn't pay attention in class for the remainder of the day. His mind was already too clouded with the events that were going on in his life. He vaguely wondered if the baby had been born yet, and how it would view him as they grew older. Luckily for his grades, however, there wasn't much taught in the curriculum that would affect it in any way. The first hour of the class was spent talking about the field trip that would occur in a couple of months. Apparently, they would be traveling to the site of the Battle of Kikyo Pass, and learn about the events that took place there. On the way there, they would be doing some basic terrain identification and training within the southeastern section of Hino Kuni's forest. Naruto remained silent the entire day, and was still silent when Iruka had placed the permission slip on his desk. Except, it wasn't more of a permission slip than a contract. Meaning if they were somehow attacked on the way there and students were killed, then it was not the village's fault. Naruto had found out that it wasn't their fault on more than one occasion. The bell rang for the day, and Naruto as usual waited in his seat for Toji and his thugs to file out before he left. The bad part about it was that Iruka occasionally started to reprimand him, because all the sensei's attention was directed at him. Fortunately for him, he snuck out of the classroom without any kind of lecture. When he got outside, he was supposed to meet his sister at the front gate of the academy so they could walk to the hospital together, but he was currently having the unpleasant experience of almost being trampled over by much larger students. He reached the front end of the academy 3 minutes later, but his sister was nowhere in sight. Most of the students were filing out of the gate, and pretty soon he was left nearly alone on the desolate academy grounds. He finally spotted her walking towards him a few minutes later, no usual spring in her step. Instead, it was replaced with a slow, solemn walk and a stoic expression on her face. Her dress was still in tatters. When the girl spotted him standing at the gate waiting for her, a light fury ignited in her eyes, and she bolted into a run. Shoving a surprised Naruto out of the way, she ran off into the street on her own, leaving Naruto in the dust behind her. Naruto gingerly got to his feet. His sister was becoming more and more hostile to him, and that thought was making him sad. She resented him so much that she wanted to run away, even while injured. Naruto watched her disappear into the distance with pained eyes, and he slowly set off to go home, permission slip in hand. He just hoped that his sister wouldn't stay mad at him forever. Haruki finally calmed down once she had gotten away from her stupid brother. He had been such a dampener on her mood for the entire day, and she didn't need that in the slightest when she was about to look upon her newborn baby sibling for the first time. She stood outside her mother's hospital room, and reproachfully touched the doorknob, as if she were debating on whether or not to open it. She steeled herself and swung open the door. Her parents turned around when they heard the door open, and their faces turned to frowns when they saw that Haruki's dress was in tatters, and that Naruto was nowhere to be seen. Her father got up from his spot in a chair while her mother remained in the bed rocking the new baby. Haruki, what happened to you? Minato asked, noticing the purple bruises all over her face and body. Haruki refused to meet the worried gaze of her father, and in a moment of weakness looked at the ground while tears poured from her eyes. Both of the parents' eyes were on the 5-year girl as she cracked underneath their gaze. I got beat up today at SS school, she cried softly. Minato and Kushina's eyes widened, and Minato placed firm, yet gentle hands on Haruki's shoulders. Tell me, Haruki, who is it that beat you up? He asked, his tone containing little more than righteous anger. These 3 bigger B-boys at S school. They talked about how they've beaten up and Naruto for the past year, and they beat me you up because I was related to him, she wailed. Minato's breath hitched in his throat. Those boys have been beating up Naruto for over a year. Then how come he had never noticed anything? Snapping himself out of his daze, he turned back to the crying girl, and wrapped his arms around her. The girl's breathing slowed after this happened, and she nuzzled into her father's chest. Sure, it's going to be alright, baby. I'll go over to the academy later today and see if we can get this whole bullying problem resolved, he said, as he stroked the back of the girl's long, blonde hair. Daddy, she mewed, and Minato noticed that his jacket was gradually becoming sopping wet with tears. Sure, it's going to be okay, he said, as he kissed the top of her head. He then let go, and looked down at his daughter with a firm, yet gentle look. Where's your brother, Haruki? He asked. Haruki squeaked, and avoided the gaze of her father. She didn't believe she would be able to avoid telling him what she did, so she thought it best to just come clean about it right now, to save her future problems. After being told what she had done, Minato stared at his daughter with a certain amount of sternness in his eyes. Haruki suddenly found her toes to be very interesting at that moment. Minato sighed. "What you did was very wrong, Haruki," he said, kneeling down and turning her head to make eye contact. "Look at me. How do you think your brother feels now, being bullied for almost a year, and being blamed by you for your hardship?" he asked. Haruki shook her head, a clear symbol for no. "I bet he feels like the lowest form of life on Earth right now, Haruki. Not because he has been bullied for the past year, but probably because he blamed himself for the bullies tormenting you, and you letting him know you feel that way is making it worse for him." But she began to protest. "I don't want to hear your excuses, Haruki. We're a family, and families forgive each other's mistakes. The entire village of Konoha is based on this principle, with the will of fire proclaiming we must love and cherish our comrades and village. Or are you telling me that you're denying the ideals of the previous generations, and are not a believer in the will of fire?" he questioned, putting Haruki on the spot. Kushina had had quite enough. "Minato, but she was cut off. I do believe in the will of fire, Daddy. And I do love the village. I love Konoha more than anything in the world, and I would gladly protect and cherish every single person in this village," Haruki proclaimed. Minato smiled brightly, radiating a feeling of warmth to the young girl. "Good. But if you truly believe in the will of fire, then I want you to apologize to your brother as soon as he gets home. Are we clear?" he asked. Haruki nodded fervently, but inside was that feeling that she just couldn't apologize to him. "That's my girl," said Minato, feeling proud of his daughter. "Now, I believe we've made you wait long enough. Don't you want to meet your new baby sister?" he asked the girl. The girl didn't react as much as they had expected, but they didn't know of the permanent change that occurred in Haruki that same day. Their vibrant little girl would soon be replaced with a colder, more serious one. She walked over to where the infant was being cradled by her mother, a shaky yet genuine smile forming upon her face as Kushina unveiled the baby's face. "Hello, I'm your big sister. I hope we can be best friends," she said, desperately hoping that her new sister would be much stronger than their brother. Haruki absent-mindedly noticed that this girl looked nothing like her. Rather than the long, rich yellow hair, it was a coarse, fiery red, thoroughly reminiscent of her mother's shade. Like her, she had no whisker marks or blemishes across her cheeks, though her skin tone was more in line with Naruto's than hers, which was odd for a newborn baby. She was a lot smaller than when she was a baby, though she may very well become tall in the future. "We've decided to name her Yukiko. Isn't that such a pretty name? Much like yours, Haruki-chan," Kushina said happily. Haruki reached out to touch the baby, but the infant's eyes fluttered open at that exact moment. Surprised at the face that loomed forward, the baby began to bawl at the sight of her older sister, her cries echoing throughout the entire mansion. Haruki stepped back in shock, covering her ears as his mother went to shush Yukiko. Minato smiled awkwardly at the incident, though his grin rapidly turned into a frown when he glanced upon his older daughter. "I'm going to my room. I'll apologize to Naruto when he gets here," she muttered crankily, taking off out the door in a hurry. Minato's frown deepened. It looked like it was going to be a long week. Naruto's excitement at meeting his new sibling had been killed much earlier, when he had assumed that his other sibling now hated his guts. Instead of rushing to the hospital at his top speed, he instead wandered through the village like a zombie, not really taking in many of his surroundings. He reached the hospital about 15 minutes later, and received his mother's room number from the nurse at the front desk. But while he was his way there, he came across the person he wanted to see the most and least at the same time. He met Haruki, as he was walking down the corridor of the second floor. Her eyes were surprised and slightly angry when they met, and one could tell that she was not yet prepared to speak with him. "Haruki," he whispered, his shock nearly as great as hers. He at least expected to meet her again with their parents, but right now they were in the same exact situation as they had been earlier. Haruki was being uncharacteristically silent. She hadn't bowled him over yet, just like she did a few minutes ago, but she seemed to be pondering something great, yet he just couldn't figure out what it was. Haruki's mind was indeed a raging storm. On one hand, she wanted to listen to her father, and apologize profusely to her brother to prove her ideology was not false, but there was another side to the argument that came into being. Every time she stared at his face, she recalled the incident that had happened earlier today. The bullies, with their mocking scowls and big fists. Her brother, who was supposed to protect her from them, was easily beaten down, leaving her to fend for herself. If he hadn't been so weak, all of this would have never happened, now or in the future. It wouldn't have. Those two options hovered around in her mind for a few moments: to forgive him, or not to forgive him. Naturally, as a 5-year-old, she went with the most selfish option in this case, and the choice to not forgive him won out in her mind. She put her hands on her hips, and glared at him forcefully. "Just to let you know, I'm never going to forgive you for what happened here, so don't try and get me to apologize," she scoffed, turning her nose into the air and walking by him. Naruto slumped. He had been expecting a reaction like that, but the reality of the situation still hurt. He was about to walk past to go the room, but Haruki was going to say one last thing. "Oh, and by the way, Tu-chan asked me to apologize to you, so if you could, tell him that I did okay?" she added. Naruto gulped in slight fear. There was definitely the hint of a threat in that sentence. And with the Kyuubi backing her up, she could easily make his life a living hell. Naruto's paranoia made him nod, to which Haruki seemed satisfied. Like Haruki before him, he entered the hospital room gingerly, taking his time with the doorknob. But relief washed over him when he realized that his parents were pleased to see that he was all right. His father asked him about earlier, to which he said that he had met Haruki and she had apologized to him. They didn't know how big of a lie that actually was. His father vaguely told him to go meet his new sister, and he only half listened to his speech. The thought of Haruki entered his mind again, and he realized that there might be 2 Harukis around the house from now on. But as soon as he laid eyes on her, all those feelings of doubt and paranoia washed away. The mere sight of the red-haired infant girl was enough to take his breath away. He vaguely remembered a similar feeling from 5 years ago, but today would be the only time he would remember it clearly. The baby looked so weak and so innocent that it looked like just a touch from even him would break her instantly. Kushina smiled at her oldest's look of wonderment at the new family member, and leaned the girl closer to her oldest sibling. The infant girl fluttered her eyes open, and unlike before, she didn't freak out at the sight of a new arrival. She eyed her brother curiously, especially when he lifted a shaky hand to touch her cheek. Yukiko laughed at the contact, surprising everyone in the room. As Naruto tried to move his hand away, she raised her little hands and grasped one of his fingers. He dumbly watched as Yukiko placed his index finger in her mouth, still giggling as she sucked on it. Naruto's dumb look was replaced by a look of pure joy, and he produced a more genuine laugh than he had done in months. 3 months later. Life went on as normal in the Namikaze household, even after their newest arrival caused all of them a great deal of turmoil. They all aged a little bit, with both Naruto and Haruki passing their birthdays, and Yukiko's growth becoming more evident. Naruto was still struggling with his ninja training, while Haruki was still thriving under it. Naruto had finally accepted his father's training, though he had shown no signs of rapid improvement under Minato's tutelage. Everyone was beginning to realize that maybe Naruto just wasn't cut out to be a ninja. Haruki still avoided him like the plague, ditching him in the academy grounds as soon as she got the chance. Meanwhile, Yukiko still adored him, always at her happiest when he was around. She also cried when he was away for too long. Which is what she would be doing while he was away on the 2-day field trip. Naruto didn't want to go, but this was a mandatory assignment for anyone who wanted to pass the class, and his parents were making him go. So, here he was, accompanied by 5 Chunin Academy instructors, and the rest of his class through the southeastern portion of the Hai-no-Kuni forest. He leafed through his survival book at an alarming rate, trying to know about the various hazards that existed throughout the forest. They were planned to reach the battle site by tomorrow morning, so they had all day today to catalog some helpful information for their future lives as ninja. Iruka, who was leading the charge, would occasionally stop walking and explain to them something about a particular plant or something. Needless to say, it wasn't very entertaining. But the real kicker for them was when it was time to break into groups. Naruto had been dreading this ever since this field trip had begun. After all, no one in the class was particularly fond of him, though some of the kids were worse than others. Iruka had begun reading off the names of those who would break off into pairs, though Naruto wasn't really paying attention. He was just repeating one thing in his mind over and over again. "Please don't be Toji. Please don't be Toji. Please don't be Toji." He prayed in his mind, so much that he didn't even register his name being called out and his worst fears becoming reality. When Naruto finally opened his eyes, most of the other kids had gone. It felt like a rock dropped in his stomach after he saw who was sauntering up towards him, a wry smirk all over his face. It was Toji, and he was looking giddier than he had ever before. "Hey, Namikaze. Looks like we're partners on this retarded assignment, buddy," he said sarcastically. Naruto gulped and nodded, while the much larger boy slung an arm around his shoulder. "Iruka-sensei assigned us to bring back 5 types of medicinal plants, and identify 3 types of poisonous plants. Now, we're going to be going into the back section of the forest. He pointed to an incredibly dense section of the forest. And you're going to do all the work for me. And don't you dare send off the emergency flare that the senseis gave us. If you do, you'll be choking on those poisonous plants you're going to identify. You understand? Toji asked, while Naruto nodded frantically. Good. Now, we'd better get going before all the others get back, he added, roughly dragging Naruto back into the dense section of the forest. It would be the last time anyone saw either of them. I've found something, yelled Naruto, once the two were away from the trail. Naruto seemed to be somewhat excited about identifying plants, but anyone could tell that Toji was just bored. He would probably take up his old habit of beating Naruto up soon. Atropa belladonna, or deadly nightshade. It's one of the most poisonous plants in the survival book. It seems to be able to grow here because of the thick shade cast by this very dense section, Naruto noted. The two were underneath the thick canopy of trees, and completely cut off from everyone else. So far, Naruto had harvested 5 health plants and identified 2 poisonous plants, so with this last thing their mission would be done. Toji just sat on his ass the entire time. That's great, Namikaze. Just hurry up the harvesting before I punch you, said Toji lazily. Naruto grinned forcefully, even though he felt the need to rip the bully limb from limb. Toji was already walking into a deeper section of the forest, while Naruto struggled to bring up the rear. He wanted to identify more plants, but both of them noticed the landscape become increasingly more barren the farther they went, until eventually they reached a large clearing that was permanently withered. What happened here? Asked a bewildered Naruto. I don't know, said Toji seriously, before a wicked grin came upon his face as he spotted a small cave over to his right. But as Naruto was surveying the damage, he suddenly felt a sharp kick to his back. The boy grunted, painfully falling to the ground, while his notes and books flew all over the place. He was kicked again, this time in the head. It caused a light flow of blood to come from his forehead. It seems you've gotten everything that I need, so now I can take my time beating you up just like I always do. I'll just tell the senseis that you got roughed up by all the sharp plants in the forest. Toji punched Naruto again, causing a spurt of blood to come from his mouth. Toji relished in his pain, turned around to sniff the air. At that moment, he felt an intense, sharp pain puncture through his left leg. The older boy cried out in pain, and shakily looked down to see the source of it. There, lodged in his left leg, was a standard kunai held by academy students during their practice. He glanced over at Naruto, who had opened a small pouch on his right hip, apparently to grab that kunai. Toji ripped the blade from his leg, watching blood gush out of the wound. You bastard! You bastard! Do you realize what you've done? Toji roared. The bully walked over to the downed Naruto, and raised the kunai high above his head. Naruto's eyes widened in shock before Toji stabbed the kunai into the right part of Naruto's abdomen. The 8-year-old screamed similarly to Toji, through the part to when he was stabbed to when Toji yanked the kunai out of Naruto. Toji was prepared to stab again in his anger, but the adrenaline and blood lost to his leg finally forced it to give out, and Toji collapsed into the ground while dropping the kunai. Toji clutched his leg in pain, completely paralyzed to be able to do anything to Naruto. Naruto too should have been in a similar situation, but for some reason he felt like moving. It was as if some strange drug had just intoxicated his senses, and it was forcing him to move. It seemed to have a similar effect on Toji, who unlike him wasn't moving at all. Out of the corner of his eye, Naruto thought he saw some kind of faint wisp emerge from the cave a little ways away. The cave? Naruto hadn't noticed that before. It looked big enough to house him, and it would provide suitable shelter, because there was no way he would be able to make it back to the group with his injury. Naruto began to crawl over to the entrance of the cave, ignoring the wounded Toji. Every time his kunai wound would hit something, pain would rocket through his body and he would pause for a few seconds. He felt inexplicably drawn to this cave for some reason, even though he had never seen it before in his life. From his view of the inside, it was indeed spacious enough to house him, and was completely free of moisture. Hopefully, he could rest here for the night and recuperate from his wound. Either that, or the senseis would come get them. Come to think of it, Toji took the flare away from me a little earlier. I don't get why he hasn't fired it off yet. He wasn't going to go back to Toji and ask though. The short problem with the kunai had already reminded him of why he didn't want to become a ninja. He wasn't going back to Toji now, he just hoped that guy didn't get up while he was in the cave. He crawled into the cave, weakly testing the rock ceiling so that it wouldn't cave in. The boy made his way towards the back end of the cave, where he could relax against the hard, rock wall. The cool shade of the cave relaxed him slightly, despite the fact that he had a shredded hip. The rock wall and dirt floor were cool to the touch, and the 8-year-old felt that he could fall asleep on it. He was about to fall asleep, but he saw a strange flash occur out of the corner of his eye. He swiveled perhaps too quickly for his injury, trying to locate the source of that flash, if there even was one in the first place. He almost sighed in relief when he saw nothing, but the sound of a clearly distinguishable hiss filled his ears after that moment. He didn't see anything, but it almost sounded like the hissing noise was coming from inside the wall. A few seconds later, and Naruto saw it. It began as little more than a prick of the substance, but it grew rapidly, oozing out of the wall in a miniature waterfall. The substance was golden in color, though it didn't seem to be tangible enough to take on a solid form. Naruto desperately backed away from the wall, still watching the golden, chakra-like substance ooze out of the wall. When there was enough of it, it spread onto the floor, rapidly approaching in on Naruto. "No! Get away!" he yelled at the wisp, backing into the farthest corner of the cave. But that turned out to be the wrong move, because as soon as his back made contact with the wall, the strange yellow chakra began oozing out of the wall faster. The yellow substance easily disintegrated the flimsy layer of clothes on Naruto's back, and Naruto's skin and the yellow chakra came into contact for the first time. The boy screamed in pain as it felt like his entire back was being lit on fire. Naruto collapsed from the pain of having foreign chakra absorbed into his system, allowing more of the yellow chakra oozing out of the wall to attack Naruto's backside. In the meantime, the chakra coming out of the other wall had converged in on Naruto, and the 8-year-old boy experienced the unpleasant sensation of being attacked by foreign chakra from all directions. The yellow chakra climbed up all sides of his body, until he was covered in a thick layer of golden energy from head to toe. And then it happened. The boy was pretty much having the experience of drowning in a sea of fire. The foreign energy was on him at all directions, he was submerged completely in it, and it suspended him in midair, engulfed in a pool of chakra. The last of the chakra in the cave piled onto the boy, but Naruto was so delirious with pain that he couldn't see what happened next. Naruto's entire body was beginning to disintegrate, and Naruto would be conscious for all of it. The yellow chakra was doing corrosive damage to his skin. It started out by charring, but that wasn't enough as the chakra completely destroyed the now blackened skin, creating little particles of black dust that spread out into the wind. Naruto vaguely noted in the excruciating pain that his skin had been vaporized, but the chakra was already beginning to attack his muscles and organs. Soon, they too shared the same fate as the chakra consumed more and more muscle tissue. His chakra coils were completely eroded, and his abysmal capacity of chakra was completely consumed by the more powerful force. If anyone outside were to see the display, that would lay eyes on a grotesque skeleton being eaten away by chakra, little black bits of dust flying off the body. But the bones too held the same fate, and soon there wasn't even a small skeleton that remained in the way of the chakra's attack. After the bones had been absorbed, there was nothing. Absolutely nothing more than a large pile of black dust on the ground next to a swarthing mass of chakra. But Naruto was indeed still alive. His pain sensors had been destroyed along with his muscles, but Naruto had been too afraid to look. He tried to open his eyes, but found that he didn't even have any eyes. Yet strangely, when he did that command, he could see the entire world through his mind's eye. He looked around, and saw that this place definitely wasn't heaven. Come to think of it, this was the same exact place he had been before. Was he still alive? Relief coursed through his entire being. Phew, just a dream, his consciousness thought, but then Naruto took a look at his body. There was no body, just a yellow mass of chakra where his body had been. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. He tried to move, but he was only a soul trapped within chakra. That's right, he was a soul now. Just a leftover consciousness that the chakra had decided to keep. He would be dead, should be dead, but this chakra decided to keep his consciousness intact, and support it with its own substance. The new ethereal being tried to move, but found that the chakra was unresponsive to him. Rather, the chakra was moving his soul for the time being. Now that the failed Bija had a consciousness, it instinctively knew what had to be done. Still, with such a weak consciousness of a human, it wouldn't become a very strong being, at least right from the get-go. Fueled by consciousness, the chakra oozed out of the cave and into the clearing. It spread out over the entire space in a thicket, consuming the wounded Toji and everything else that would get into its path. Then, the chakra began to converge. And it grew. And grew. And grew. It grew until it was over 500 feet tall, and Naruto was already aware of the change in size. The chakra merged and bended until it was a rough shape of something, and that was when the real work would happen. The chakra began to shrink, becoming denser and denser in the process. It packed itself so densely that the chakra began to solidify. The chakra packed itself into makeshift bones and organs. And a body. The final result was a being of about 100 feet, and it had a great resemblance to the animal called a lizard. The chakra's work done, it was time for it to go into a permanent sleep, and allow their guest consciousness to take control of the new body. Naruto didn't know what to think when he actually gained control of this new, powerful body. On one hand, he had watched the entire process occur with the chakra creating this body, and apparently he had been randomly chosen to control it. The old Namikaze Naruto was gone, and its place was just this thing. Naruto looked at his gigantic body. He really was a freak. He was over 100 feet, for God's sake. He had golden yellow, reptilian skin that was covering in these ugly scales all over his body. His eyes were these freakish, completely circular things, the irises were colored a bright red, and his pupils were elongated. Alone his neck, legs, and spinal cord, cruel-looking spikes that could gouge through a man's torso poked out of Naruto's ugly, yellow skin. On the ends of his 4 feet, there were ridiculously sharp claws that were almost 3 feet in length. He opened his mouth, and felt serrated, sharp fangs, every single one of his teeth. And to top it all off, all he had on his ass was this pathetic little stump of a tail. His family would never want to see him again. His village would never want to see him. His family. His village. Naruto began to breathe heavily, mulling over the revelations. My family, my village, he breathed harder. My family. My village, he thundered in his mind. He attempted to scream those words into the wind, but all that came out was a series of roars and clicks. And Naruto knew this as well. Naruto looked around himself insanely, and in his panic tried to pursue the best course of action. But his clouded mind couldn't come up with a solution, and his churning emotions led the behemoth to bolt toward the village, his massive weight knocking over trees as he pursued his goal. Iruka was beginning to doubt his eyes when he viewed that enormous monster rise above the tree-line. It was a bijou, no doubt about it. Even if he had never seen a zero-tailed lizard be documented on records, the acrid feel of a bijou's chakra was unmistakable. The other Chunin had already noticed it too, but he silently prayed that none of the children actually turned around to view that monstrosity. The children didn't seem to feel the tension that had arisen within their senseis, but they noticed that tension turned to fear when the new bijou darted in a particular direction. The direction of Konoha. Aoba, get the children to safety at the Kiko Pass battle site. It isn't safe for them to go back to the village at this moment. I'll head back to Konoha and warn Hokage-sama about the approaching danger, he whispered to his second-in-command for the field trip. Okay, but we're missing Naruto and Toji. Are you sure you want me to go on? Asked Aoba, doing a quick documentation of the children. Iruka didn't hear any of that, his panic already setting him back towards the village. He just hoped he could get there before the bijou could. Aoba muttered something under his breath, and hoped he could get the children away without them noticing anything. What? Are you kidding me? Roared Minato, when he absorbed what Iruka had just told him. No, I'm not, Hokage-sama. What I saw in the forest was a bijou-class chakra beast that was currently heading in the village's direction. I've never seen this one in the textbooks before, but the resemblance to a bijou is identical, said Iruka. What about your students? Asked Minato. I sent them ahead to safety with Aoba. I figured that it would not be safe for them to come back to the village. Minato slumped down in relief. So that means Naruto is okay. Minato grit his teeth in panic. So that was the heavy chakra that had fallen over the village. He knew he had a bad feeling about that chakra, but he couldn't quite place his finger on it. Sighing, Minato looked out of the window of his office, and his eyes widened when he took in the figure that was appearing from beyond the horizon. It was huge, it was a lizard, and it had the same feeling as a bijou. There was no mistaking the resemblance in Iruka's report. Minato rose out of his chair, eyes fixated on the being. A scream broke off his daze, and Minato looked down to see that a few villagers have already noticed the great being approaching. The village was already being sent into a panic. Iruka, Minato began solemnly. I have a very important order that you need to fulfill. With that, Minato leaned in and whispered the order in Iruka's ear. Iruka's eyes widened. Are you sure? He asked, not surprised when his leader nodded. All right, the sensei agreed, but he paused when he reached the door. What about you, Hokage-sama? Minato sighed, and fastened his jacket around himself. Reaching into his desk, he pulled out a very special set of seals, scrolls, and kunai. I will engage the target. Naruto was nearly on the gates of Konoha, his panic-stricken mind a torrent. Maybe now he could get some help. Kuchios no jutsu, came a voice from directly in front of him. A large puff of smoke about his size appeared a distance in front of him, and this warty, red toad smoking a pipe blocked his way. A small figure jumped onto the toad's head, and Naruto didn't know whether to be pleased or to panic. Dad! It's me, it's Naruto! He yelled, desperately trying to reach his father. But all that came out were the same roars and hisses that he had made before. His heart dropped into his stomach when he realized that his father couldn't understand him. Minato. Don't tell me you've called me here to deal with a second Bijou attack. Naruto heard the toad say. I'm sorry, boss. But I need you to deal with this being right now. It resembles a Bijou, but it isn't one that we've documented yet. An undocumented Bijou? I didn't know there could be such a thing. Why should I have to fight something like that when we don't even know its strength? Asked Gamabunta. Blame Jiraiya-sensei for letting me sign the contract in the first place, said Minato, a grin coming onto his face. Gamabunta smirked for a moment, before it gradually evolved into full-blown laughter. Ha ha! It really is Jiraiya's fault, isn't it? Well, since you're my best summoner and everything, I'll lend you a hand this time. Besides, this one can't be as difficult as the QB, Gamabunta commented. We're going to need some oil first, okay, boss? Questioned Minato. You got it! Roared Gamabunta, as he spit oil out of his mouth at the great best. Minato flashed through some quick hand seals. Katon, Gameya Enden! Minato cried, igniting the oil with a quick fire technique. The oil went up in a burst of flames, which Naruto panicked and moved his barely responsive body to the right. He attempted to retreat and go back later, but Gamabunta and Minato were ready for him. Gamabunta hopped over the beast and blocked his path away, but Naruto reflexively kicked his front right leg out. The lizard's claws penetrated the toad's right shoulder, but Gamabunta wasn't finished yet. The toad slowly drew his giant dagger, going for the kick slice to Naruto's reptilian head. Again, Naruto reflexively raised his other front leg, standing on his back once and blocking the blow. Gamabunta attempted to slice through the arm, but found that the scales were just too tough. Boss! Cried out Minato as Gamabunta hopped back. Those scales are really tough, commented Gamabunta. What should we do, boss? I don't know. We'll just have to keep fighting until something works. The two giant animals continued fighting for another 5 minutes, with Naruto gradually getting pushed back by the more powerful toad. Naruto had lasted this long on nothing more than reflexes, but that was all about to change. It was in the middle of the fight, when Naruto noticed all these chains seemed to wrap themselves around his body. Pretty soon, Naruto was completely restrained by them, and was rendered unable to move. Kushina! Minato cried happily, as his wife was sitting in a reclined position a ways away from the battle. She grinned foxily back at her husband, reassuring him of their victory. You can stop now, Minato. I've got him from here on, she said, flashing through some hand seals. Naruto's reptilian eyes widened when these enormous spikes materialized out of nowhere. 4 smaller ones and 1 huge one, bigger than the rest, all pointed at him. Naruto had a sneaking suspicion of what was happening. Mom! Stop, it's me! He roared, but the same results as before happened yet again. Naruto roared in pure pain as the 5 impaled him directly through his 4 feet and his chest. A surge of electricity coursed through his body, and he could see the spikes jutting out of the other end of his body. Her baby daughter was still asleep at her side, even during when she drew lines all across her stomach, followed by a big black circle where her navel was. Kushina flashed through some more seals. No! No! Naruto yelled, as his body began to dematerialize again. His solid form became wispy again, even though it didn't dull the sense of pain at all. The now gaseous Naruto completely flowed into the markings on his baby sister's stomach, the ugly black markings disappearing as he did. The little girl didn't stir at all, completely unaware that her brother had just been sealed within her. The scars upon the world left after Naruto's wake would tell a great tale about a battle between 2 beings of immense size, regardless of how short of one-sided the fight really was. But the man and woman who had started the battle in the first place would remain unknown in their role, the landscape showing no clues to whether they were there, or why they initiated this battle in the first place. The blond man, Namake's Minato, smiled kindly down at his infant daughter, the one who was to hold the new bijou, and to use its power to aid the village in its exploits. The Yondaime Hokage was fully confident that his daughter would lead a full life thanks to her bijou. Kushina, on the other hand, wasn't so certain of that. Having been a Jinchuriki for much of her life, she knew firsthand of the kind of hardships one may face being one of those chosen ones. Thankfully, such a life had been completely avoided with her other daughter Haruki, but the thought that Minato would so easily seal a bijou into his child was a little disconcerting. Still, she went along with her husband's judgment, and acted practically in the face of an emergency of the village. Regardless of how the bijou was unidentified, a bijou's chakra can give it away in a heartbeat, and this one appeared to be attacking the village. The red-haired woman walked up to her daughter, hoisting the sleeping infant girl into her arms. She would trust her husband, but not after she got some answers first. She looked up. Minato was smiling at her brightly, before once again smiling at his daughter. There was no doubt in his expression, no fear for things to come. Still, she decided to voice her opinions to him. Minato, she began lightly. Was this really necessary? Sealing a bijou into our baby daughter, creating another Jinchuriki. Wasn't sealing the Kyuubi and Haruki enough? She asked, her voice never holding any tone of anger or contempt for Minato. Minato frowned lightly, and began running his fingers through Kushina's red locks. Kushina, you know that we've discussed this back when you were pregnant. That, if there was ever another opportunity to create another Konoha Jinchuriki, that we would do it for our own child. He paused, as Kushina looked away from him. He adjusted her head back to him. You know I love you, and I love Yukiko, and I only want what's best for her. But I see Haruki's life, how happy she is, how she's treated as a kind of hero, how inherently superior she is. The Jinchuriki don't have to be associated with hatred and prejudice, and Haruki is living proof of how to have a good life as a Jinchuriki. I want the era of pure hatred and contempt for the Jinchuriki to come to an end, and for the Jinchuriki to be treated like the heroes that they are. Growing up in Konoha, the most tolerant of the hidden villages, will ensure this for our daughter. I want her to live life like Haruki, one of the happiest and most privileged individuals in the entire country. He finished, smiling as his words seemed to be coming through to his wife. He hugged both of them lightly, much to the surprise of the red-haired woman. I know you're worried that Yukiko will live the life you once lived, but I can assure you that will not happen, Kushina. He trailed off, before gaining a much more hardened look. Besides, it's fortunate that we were able to seal this new bijou quickly. The other villages would be quick to lap up this new bijou and seal it, and I can't imagine yet another child being abused at the hands of one of the other villages, he said calmly. Kushina looked up at her husband. She wanted to yell at him, to point out flawed his logic was, and how risky this endeavor was, but she just couldn't. His words had touched her heart in more ways than one, and oddly enough, she found herself supporting his decision. They would raise a fine young lady, who grew up in the comfort of her Jinchuriki status. It was the least they could do for her. She then offered a light smile at her husband. Yeah, you're right. I still want to know where that bijou came from, Minato told himself, after he had left Yukiko in Kushina's care and headed back to his office. He had deployed several ANBU to go, and quelled the panic that had arisen. Thankfully, it wasn't as bad as the Kyuubi attack, as there were no real fires or riots that pervaded throughout the city. The blond man sat down at his desk, thinking about the newly encountered bijou. It wasn't anything he had seen before, nor was it written about in any book he had ever seen. It had no tails. Does that mean it could be called the Rabi? The true nature of the beast's power remained unknown for the time being. The only thing that was certain was that this thing was in fact a bijou, given its unmistakable chakra signature that was almost identical to the other chakra beasts. He would have to document this new bijou, getting it into the record books. He was worried about the effect this new bijou could have on the elemental nations though. With an entirely new bijou appearing on the scene, the balance of power the Shodai had created would be thrown off balance. That was another reason for creating another Jinchuriki. As much as he hated waving a big stick around to other nations, it was better that Konoha owned the bijou than anyone else. Regardless of who owned the bijou, people were going to be pissed. After all, the bijou were so coveted that wars have been fought over them in the past, and even though those days were over, and the other villages were highly unlikely to start a war over a bijou nowadays, it didn't change the fact that bijou were simply tools that were to be used by shinobi, and nothing more. He was just about to finish up his paperwork for the day, when a young chunin that Minato recognized as Aoba came bursting through the door, panting wildly and overall looking a little worse for wear. Aoba! Minato cried, looking slightly surprised at the chunin. What happened? He asked, concern etched into his features. Aoba stumbled up towards Minato's desk, placing his hand on the hard wood and catching his breath. He looked up into his leader's confused eyes, a deep look of sorrow piercing into Minato's soul. The future Tokubetsu-jun leaned back, preparing words that he wished weren't true. Hokage-sama, I'm afraid I have some bad news. It's about your son, he said solemnly, and that was all the Minato needed to hear before he rose from his seat in a flurry. What? What is it? He roared at the Chunin, any pretense of confusion now gone from his face. Aoba buckled slightly from under the harsh tone of the Hokage, but he continued anyway. I got here as fast as I could, when I realized what had happened. We were taking the children through the High no Kuni's forest on the way to Kikyo Pass, when we did our usual assignment of terrain identification. However, your son and his partner Toji never returned from out of the forest. We vehemently searched the surrounding area for them, but we couldn't find any trace of them. They also went missing at the same time that Bijou appeared, so I'm afraid he trailed off, trying to be delicate with his choice of words to the Hokage, who was now clearly going through a tough, personal time. We brought the children back home as soon as the Bijou attack was over. The rest of them are safe at home now, the Chunin finished. Minato collapsed back down on his desk, his eyes wide and his breathing heavy. Looking down, he noticed that his hands had begun shaking, and he couldn't control them at all. Calm down, Minato. You're still on the job right now. You have to take this information with dignity, and not break down from it. Besides, if Naruto was killed by that Bijou, there should have at least been a body. Yet Aoba said they didn't find anything. There's nothing that says Naruto is dead, nothing at all, he thought, trying to control himself. I see. Thank you, Aoba. I'll file a missing persons report about those two. You are dismissed, he said simply. Aoba, deciding to give the man some space, silently filed out of the office after a quick bow to his leader. As soon as Aoba had left the building, Minato rose from his chair, and like a zombie he walked out of his office and into the Konoha archives, where he could find the information on his son and Toji, and compile his report on them. Back in his office, he looked at the picture of the two boys. His small, scrawny son, and the much larger brown-haired boy who looked something like a bully, if his expression in the picture was anything to go by. And as the grieving man filled out their reports, it pained him so much to put the phrase, likely deceased by volition of Bijou attack at the bottom of his son's profile. The thing Minato was least looking forward to when he arrived home was how to break the sad news to the rest of his family. In one hand he clutched a copy of the missing persons report, feeling somewhat nauseous from just holding the tainted scrap of paper. He thought of his wife Kushina, and how she would be crushed by her son's disappearance. He thought of his daughter Haruki, who had just made amends with her brother. And most importantly, he thought of little Yukiko, who would now likely grow up without her older brother. His ANBU guards bowed to him when he arrived at the Namikaze complex, their masks never giving away their true feelings. He walked up to the front door and lightly gripped the handle, a great sadness overcoming his entire being. He took a deep breath, and opened the door with a slight creak. Peeking inside, he heard the sound of something sizzling, and then turned to see his wife in the kitchen, apparently. His older daughter was sitting on the couch, curled up in a book about ninja weaponry. His youngest was likely taking her nap upstairs. Kushina was the first to notice him, and she smiled at him when he entered through the front door. However, her happiness quickly turned into surprise and concern as she saw how ragged her husband looked. He was walking with a posture unlike him, his hair was slightly messy, and there were great big bags underneath his eyes. All in all, he looked stressed. Mina. She trailed off, as her husband entered the kitchen and stared at her, a look of sorrow in his eyes. Walking towards her, he grasped her hands lightly, and she locked eyes with him. We need to talk, he said softly and sullenly, though there was an air of finality in his voice. Perplexed at her husband's odd behavior, she followed him into the living room, where their daughter lay on the couch. The blonde-haired girl smiled as she saw her father sit on the couch. Hi, Daddy, she said happily, rising to her feet and hugging her father. Minato almost teared up at the action right there, but he remained stoic, and in return, he wrapped his arms tightly around Haruki, cherishing the bond and hoping that he'd never have to let her go. Daddy, what's wrong? Asked the curious girl, as she noticed that her father's demeanor was much different than his usual one. The Hokage released his grip on her after she asked that question, before turning to glance at both females in the room, whose expressions were twisted in worry. He took a deep breath, and began talking. Kushina, Haruki, there's no easy way for me to tell you this, he began, noticing that his wife and daughter were both listening intently to his words. I have some terrible, terrible news. News about something that I wish would never happen to us, he said lowly. Just tell us, Minato. We need to know what the problem is, Kushina said, her voice pleading and slightly desperate. Minato turned to her, and she noticed that his eyes were starting to become slightly glossy. Naruto is missing, he whispered, though the words resonated throughout the room as if someone had yelled them at the top of their lungs. Kushina covered her mouth with her hands, and already Minato could see tears welling in within them. Haruki stood frozen, her face a blank mask in what he assumed to be pure disbelief. Amid Kushina's sniffles, he continued on. It was on the field trip he was sent on. The class was assigned to break off into partners and do some terrain identification. Naruto never returned from that. The Chunin instructors couldn't find even a trace of Naruto or his partner. It's like they just disappeared off the face of the planet. He paused for a moment to let it sink in. Also, the time he went missing matches up with the appearance of the new bijou, so he may even be he trailed off, and those end words were enough for Kushina to break down completely. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she sobbed and sniffled heavily, and Minato watched as she fell to her knees, sobs still violently racking her body. It was the kind of sob that only a broken mother could produce. Minato rose from the couch, and slowly walked over to his grief-stricken wife. In what felt like a span of 1,000,000 years, he bent down to the ground and hugged her against his couch, rocking the woman slowly. They continued this on in silence for nearly a half hour, the noises coming from the house being from Kushina's pained sobs, but eventually, when Kushina had exhausted all her tears for the time being, she pushed away from Minato violently, her sadness becoming pure rage. Minato looked at her, surprised that such anger and hatred could be possible on a human face. He grimaced slightly as Kushina carelessly dug her nails into his flesh, though she wasn't focused on him at all. That monster took away my Naruto, and we just let it be sealed in our daughter. It doesn't deserve that kind of fate. I'm gonna go unseal it right now, Minato. I'm gonna kill it. I'm gonna gut that monster who took away my Naruto. She shrieked at the top of her lungs, as much as her hoarse voice could allow. Minato wrapped his arms around her midsection, trying to console the rampaging Kushina. He hoisted her over his shoulder, and in response she began pounding his back with her fists. Minato winced at that. Kushina's blows were strong, considering she was a Kage-level ninja, but he didn't think she really mustered up that much strength in her current state. The blonde Hokage laid her down gently on the couch, where she resumed crying yet again. Minato sat next to him, and once again wrapped his arms around her, though it was significantly rougher this time. Calm down, Kushina. You can't just go and unseal a bijou like that. If you go and unseal the Rabi right now, there's a high chance that Yukiko will die from it, Uzumaki or no. As much as I hate to admit it, Yukiko is stuck with our son's possible killer, and she will have to learn how to use its power. He consoled. Kushina seemed to calm down slightly from her husband's words, though she continued to sniffle all throughout the night. You're right. Of course you are, Minato. I can't just go endanger Yukiko because I feel the desire for revenge. We may have made a tremendous mistake, Minato, but we're going to have to live with ourselves, and pray that one day Yukiko will forgive her parents' idiocy, she said. She will, Kushina. She most definitely will, Minato said lightly, stroking Kushina's hair. So what do we do now? Asked Kushina, her sniffles receding down into nothing. Minato smiled sadly at her, trying in a vain attempt to cheer her up, despite the situation. We pray. We pray and we hope that our son is still alive out there. Pray that he only went missing, and that we'll be able to see him again someday. It may be a stretch, but that's all we have right now. The parents sat there in silence from that point on. Haruki, despite witnessing her mother's breakdown, didn't change her frozen, stoic expression, nor did she move an inch during the entire ordeal. As her parents sat there in silence for the rest of the night, Haruki finally moved from his position a few hours after sitting there silently. Her parents watched her walk over to the stairs, but they didn't say a word. I'm going to my room, she croaked out, and she ascended the stairs without another word. As she walked up the stairs, one could maybe see a single, lonely tear escape her left eye and roll down her cheek, though it may have been just a trick of the light. For the next week, Minato did things with significantly less energy than he usually did. He didn't smile, wave, or talk to any of the Konoha ninja, and he shut himself up in his office and refused to see anyone. However, the current day was also the day that an ambassador from Suna had a meeting with him, one that he was required to take part in, or possibly lose the alliance between them. It wasn't a very important meeting either, just them discussing some domestic issues as well as coming to a few international agreements. The ambassador showed up around noon, arrogant enough to let himself into the room. He was a slightly chunky man in his 40s, dressed in the ceremonial black robes of Sunagekure no Sato. He had slanted, untrustworthy eyes, and thin pencil mustache that lined his upper lip. Ah, greetings Hokage-sama. I trust you have been well recently? His voice was high-pitched and slightly mocking, and if he knew about Minato's recent tragedy, he certainly didn't let him know. Minato forced a smile at the unpleasant man. "Welcome to Konoha, Hayazashi-san. I assume your journey here went smoothly," he asked, mimicking Hayazashi's faux, yet polite tone of voice to the ambassador. Yes, Hokage-sama. The journey here from Suna was most pleasant, if a little uneventful. I must say, I look forward to trying the famous Konoha hot springs while I'm in town," he replied, trying to break the ice and failing. "Oh, well, please do. You're our guest here, after all. I'm sure they would be delighted to have you." With their introductions done, the two men went right to business with their talk of political and social issues that they hoped to solve. The talks went by fairly simply, with Hokage and ambassador working out a reasonable solution to all their problems that Hayazashi would relay to his superiors in his report. However, it was near the end of the talk that things got a little interesting. "So, I've recently heard about the incident you had with the bijou attack. A tragic occurrence really. Konoha always seems to be the place where these things attack. But I suppose you've also gained another Jinchuriki in the process, am I right?" the ambassador asked slyly. "Oh, well," Minato trailed off, uncertain on what he should answer. "And is it true that this new Jinchuriki that you have holds an undiscovered bijou?" he prodded, a little too curious. Minato knew that this was going to happen sooner or later. The other villages would jump at the opportunity to get their sweaty mitts on another bijou. It was best to tell them the truth up front now, lest the village could accuse for treachery later on. Yes, well, the laws concerning bijou capture do state that any wild bijou is up for grabs. You have had good fortune to be able to add to your village's power, Hokage-sama, the slimy man said. Well, if that's all our talk is going to entail, and all the issues have been resolved, then I believe I will take my leave for now. I bid you farewell for now, Hokage-sama, and wish you the best of luck in your village's prosperity," he said, as Hayazashi turned to leave. He heard Minato greet him goodbye shakily, and as he walked out the door and past a couple of genin, a wide smirk came onto his face at the information he learned. Oh, the village council would be so pleased to learn of this. Deep within the recesses of Yukiko's mind, a great beast slept soundly, unaware of all the problems that were going around in the outside world. The beast was a golden lizard, with a little stump of a tail. It was curled up into a ball, breathing deeply as it slept. Despite being asleep, it was locked inside a giant cage with a piece of paper that read seal on it, trapped within a sewer-like complex. It was impaled by 5 spikes, one large main one in his chest, and 4 smaller ones that were impaling its limbs. The spikes impaled the creature right into the floor of the cage, which was stone structure quite different from the sewers outside of the cage. Occasionally, the creature would stir in its sleep, as if suffering some horrible nightmare. After nearly 3 days of being unconscious, the creature woke, and the first thing that it noticed was pain. Pure pain. Agonizing pain. It didn't know the cause of such pain. When it tried to move, it was even more painful, and he succeeded in going nowhere. The creature panicked, looking all around him, trying to figure out just what was going on here. "Where am I? What am I doing here?" it asked, but the noise came out as nothing more than a loud gargle. Its panic rose, and it tried to move again, only to be dealt more pain than it could possibly imagine. After a few minutes, it finally noticed that it was in fact impaled straight through its body with 5 gargantuan spikes, connecting him to the floor. It couldn't move, no matter how much it wanted to. "Why am I here? What did I do to deserve this? I'm a human, right? I'm Naruto. I'm not some kind of monster," he thought in his mind, and if Naruto could have cried, he would have very well been doing so at the moment. The lizard bijou started to breathe heavier, and the events of a few days began to come back to them in full force. The field trip, the incident with Toji, becoming this thing, having a panic attack and heading towards Konoha, and finally being impaled by spikes and sealed in his sister by his own mother. The events were more painful to remember than the spikes, and Naruto closed his eyes and roared in pure emotional pain, trying to block out the bad memories. He attempted to clutch his head, but was rudely reminded that his limbs were being impaled. He roared even louder, and began hitting his head against the cage, making loud banging noises that would go heard by no one in the outside world. "What did I do to deserve this?" the great beast roared. "Is this God's way of punishing me for being so weak? Why did you do this to me, Mom? Wasn't I a good son? I always tried to be kind, so why didn't you recognize me as you sealed me away in here?" He gargled, still banging his head. The only thing was free to move, against the cage. After nearly 5 minutes, the banging ceased, and a look of pure hopelessness appeared on his face, and he leaned his head against the cold, iron bars of the cage. "I'm alone in here, aren't I? No one's ever going to come help me in here, are they? I'm trapped in here alone," he thought, before he lifted his head and let loose a roar of pure agony, which would once again never go heard by anyone. After his roar was over, Naruto laid his head down on the cold stone floor, brooding silently and preparing for the long imprison that he undoubtedly suffer. My name is Namikaze Naruto, and I am a monster. I don't say this because I have done some truly evil action in the past that I regret wholeheartedly. In actuality, I have done nothing wrong except live my life, but maybe that is the reason God is punishing me. I call myself a monster, because I literally am a monster. Almost 11 years ago, I had an unfortunate accident, and ended up becoming a Bijou, one of the now 10 giant chakra monsters living in the world. And to add insult to injury, I was sealed away in my youngest sister by the hands of my own mother, where to this day I remain impaled along the walls and floor of this tiny chamber, never being able to move. Always impaled, always dank, and always very, very lonely. Even if my vocal cords have adjusted to allow human speech again, it was of no use, as there was no one to talk to. I have come to terms with the fact that I am a Bijou, and that I will never be able to go back to my previous form or lifestyle. I guess you could say I accepted this about 6 years into my imprisonment, where I discovered I could take on a more human form. Despite this, however, this human form is still completely recognizable as something inhuman. Even if I escape and live the rest of my life in this human form, I would forever be shunned as an outcast and as a monster. This I know to be true. But even still, I long to be free from this place. I can never again enjoy the company of a human, but being a Bijou has granted me a bizarre appreciation for the simpler things in life. For the longest time, I have yearned to simply run free throughout the world and be unworried about worldly desires, despite my lack of companionship. Nothing would make me happier at this time. However, I have not lost all of my human feelings, and most of them remain intact. I would be lying if I said that this decade-long imprisonment has not made me bitter and jaded. I have a boiling pot of hate deep within my body. Hate towards my family, hate towards the power that be, and hate towards the ninja system. But most importantly, I hated the events that lead to this. To the events that lead me to be imprisoned. But that's enough about that. My inane ramblings about my miserable life don't matter to anyone, because I'll be lucky to ever be able to see the light of day ever again. In the village of Konoha, the first thing anyone would notice as they started their day was the orange and black paint that coated the 4 faces on the Hokage monument. It was vandalism at its finest, and while most everyone was staring with indignation at the action, the perpetrator was currently laughing her ass off. A pair of chunin rushed around the village, desperately searching for the culprit of the admittedly ingenious prank. She laughed at their feeble attempts to stop her before she turned around and bumped straight into a larger body. There, a man in his early mid-30s stood in front of her, an annoyed expression on his scarred, tanned face. His right eye seemed to twitching a bit, and the culprit of the prank rubbed the back of her head sheepishly. Heh. Hi, Iruka-sensei, she greeted, trying to appease the authority figure in front of her, though how well it was working was anyone's guess. Yukiko! Not again! What are you doing during class? He screamed at her, causing the youngest Namikaze to grin awkwardly. Iruka just glared at her intensely, before he produced a length of rope from God knows where. Yukiko just barely realized what was going to happen before she was tied up and dragged back to the academy. 5 minutes later, she was sitting tied up on the floor of the academy. Iruka was clearly mad at her, but the rest of class only seemed amused at the girl's predicament. There was no trace of true mocking or dislike on any of their faces. In fact, many of them were actually very amused with the pranks that she had been known to pull. She smiled back at the crowd, causing the students to laugh quietly at her. Iruka sensed this and glared at the class before turning back to the red-haired Namikaze. Although he was mad on the outside, Iruka was happy for her. She reminded him vaguely of himself while in the academy, though unlike him, she wasn't considered annoying by everyone in her class. She was actually very good friends with Konohamaru, Udan, and Moegi. It was heartwarming to say the least. They all knew about the thing that resided within her body, but they had chosen to accept her regardless, mostly on part of the yondaime and their parents' efforts. Still, he knew in the end that she had to be punished for her latest prank. We're going to review the henge technique. Those who have already passed need to do it as well, he said, drawing groans and protests from the crowd. Okay, now the class could afford to be slightly annoyed with Yukiko. A few kids went before her, but when it was her turn she sauntered up to the middle of the room like nothing was happening. A cocky smirk appeared on her face, before she clasped her hands into a seal and yelled. Henge! Her girlish voice reverberated throughout the room, a cloud of smoke appeared, and there was a perfect copy of Iruka himself standing where Yukiko once was. The fake Iruka changed back into the red-haired 11-year-old, before she smirked at her now approving teacher. She wasn't the top of the class for nothing after all, a fact she so graciously owed to the being inside her. Her face brightened as her teacher complimented her on her performance, but it blanched and became an annoyed frown with his next words. "But that still doesn't mean you're not going to be scrubbing the Hokage mountain later," he yelled. Her ear twitched as she heard some light chuckling from the line of students. She turned around to glare at them half-heartedly, before she walked back to her seat, muttering something about how today was gonna suck. She continued her muttering as she got to work on the Hokage monument, scrubbing the paint off her father's face, which had really been hit the hardest. Iruka sat on top of the mountain, always keeping a reproachful eye on her work. He narrowed his eyes as he caught her murmuring something about stupid teachers, before he adopted a thoughtful look. "Hey Yukiko," he said cautiously, as the girl in question turned upwards and gave him an unamused stare. "Well, I was thinking if you do a good job maybe I could take you out for some ramen tonight," the chunin said. Yukiko's face brightened at that immediately, and she immediately began working with a zeal previously absent. It was a little-known fact that she was the biggest ramen fanatic in her family, and that was really saying something. Later that night, after she was all done with her cleaning, Yukiko sat with her admittedly favorite teacher, gobbling up ramen faster than the eye could see. Iruka could only watch as bowl after bowl disappeared into the bottomless pit that was her belly. He could already hear his wallet screaming in pain. "Yukiko, why would you deface the Hokage monument like that? Don't you know who the Hokages are?" Iruka asked. Yukiko slurped up her 11th bowl, before setting it down on the counter and facing her sensei. "Of course I do. My own dad is one, remember? The Hokages are the strongest in the village, and legends among ninjas. Not to mention, Dad saved this village from a monster fox and a monster lizard. I want to follow in my dad's footsteps, and become greater than them all," she exclaimed, pointing her chopsticks at Iruka. However, despite her praise for the Hokages, her mood suddenly darkened, as a thought came over her. "Hey, sensei. Can I ask you something?" she barely whispered, catching Iruka off guard by the subdued tone of voice. "You've been a sensei for a really long time, right? And I've heard several times that you taught my sister while she was in the academy," so she trailed off, and it felt like a stone dropped into Iruka's stomach. "Does that mean you also taught him?" she asked, her voice even meeker than it was seconds earlier. Iruka's breath hitched in his throat at the question. Yukiko's brother Naruto, the oldest Namikaze kid and the one who had died during the field trip supervised by him. A great wave of sadness washed over him, before he looked over at Yukiko. The ways her eyes shone right now reminded Iruka so much of the small, shy little boy who had awkwardly shown up at the academy in his class. But that seemed to be where the similarities ended. Yukiko wasn't small like her brother was. She wasn't exactly tall for her age like her sister was, but she had a very healthy build. Her skin was slightly tanned, and her long red hair ran down to her mid-back. She had her mother's wide face and button nose, but her blue eyes were all from her father. She wore a simple white t-shirt with a red spiral on it, and normal black shinobi pants. "Yes, Yukiko. I taught him," he said simply. He didn't feel that any more words would be necessary. She didn't need to know that he was killed by the very thing that now lived inside her. However, he got the feeling that she already knew. "He was killed by the Rabi inside me, wasn't he, Iruka-sensei?" It wasn't a question. Iruka half expected the sentence, but it didn't hurt any less to tell her the truth. "Yes." The girl lifted up her shirt and rubbed her belly, tracing her fingers across her belly button, where the currently invisible seal was. "I had a feeling that it was the Rabi that killed him. The day he died matches up completely with the day that the stupid lizard appeared and attacked Konoha. Still, it's very possible that he's alive out there somewhere. They never found a body after all. All of us like to believe that he's out there somewhere, whether it's because it gives us comfort, I don't know. I just know that once I become Hokage, I will devote everything in my power to finding him. I bet you think I'm stupid, right, Iruka-sensei? And that there's no way that he's still alive, right? And maybe you're right, but this is fine, right? It isn't wrong for a girl to want to meet her brother, is it?" Yukiko found words to be more difficult to say as she reached the end of her monologue, and Iruka could tell that she was close to tears. Iruka said nothing, but he got off of his stool and walked over to Yukiko, and before she could react, the teacher had pulled her into a hug. The red-haired girl was taken aback for a second, before she let a few tears fall from her eyes, and returned the hug. "I don't think you're stupid, Yukiko. I think that's a wonderful mindset, and very admirable. And you're right, we have no way of knowing that Naruto is dead. He could just be out there somewhere." Biding his time, he released Yukiko from the hug, and she seemed to feel a little bit better. "Thanks, Iruka-sensei, but I don't think that's right. Dad has looked for him tirelessly for over a decade, and we've up with no clues, no leads to suggest that he's still alive. But I think he was killed by the Rabi. You know, I could hate being a Jinchuriki, and having that thing stuck inside me, but I don't. My parents were just trying to make me have a happy life, and the Rabi will help me on the path of being a ninja. I don't blame them for sealing it in me, especially since my sister's life was enhanced by it, she said softly, and Irika figured there was more to this than she let on. Irika tried to say, but he was cut off before he could get anything out. There you are, Yukiko, I figured you would be here. A calm feminine voice said, as the flaps to the ramen stand folded, and a new individual entered the restaurant. Oh, Harukine, she said, as she finally noticed her older sister enter the stand. Whereas Yukiko was almost the spitting image of her mother, Haruki was the opposite, taking mostly after her father. A complete bombshell of a woman, Haruki definitely had the attention of the males in the village. She kept her blonde hair in a ponytail that reached her upper back, and her face was much more angular and pronounced, though she had similar eyes to her sister. She was very tall, clocking in at around 5 feet 8 inches or 5 feet 9 inches, and somewhat slender, having very long legs and a curvy build. Her breasts were very large, being the same size as her best friend Hinata's, if not even bigger, which Yukiko noted with envy. Some even said they would be as big as Tsunade's legendary ones in a couple of years, though that was likely an exaggeration. Her outfit was very provocative, to say the least. Fishnet stockings rode up her legs into her navy blue shinobi shorts, which hugged her figure nicely. Her shirt consisted of a sleeveless white tank top that revealed quite a bit of sizable cleavage, and it was cut off several inches above her belly button, exposing her toned stomach. Yukiko was jealous of her sister, to say the least. She wished she could wear those type of outfits, as well as have her body. She hoped with all her heart that she could be just as attractive when she got older. Though, with a handsome father and beautiful mother, she had all the genetics in her favor, so she doubted she would have to worry about that. But her sister wasn't just beautiful. She was a genius, as well. Starting out her training early, Haruki made it to Genin at the age of 7, and now at the tender age of 16, she was an ANBU captain, and probably the 4th or 5th strongest ninja in the village. She seemed destined to take the mantle of Hokage from her father, and that brought her into conflict with Yukiko, who was aiming to become Hokage in her own right. Still, her sister had issues. Yukiko wasn't sure, but she could swear that the environment got 10 degrees colder just from being in her presence. Something had stirred her into a cold and arrogant human being. Not to mention, the pampered life she had lived made her downright spoiled, and despite her coldness, she loved being the center of attention. The presence of the Kyuubi, the strongest of the tailed beasts, almost gave her a god complex, and she expected everything to be handed to her on a silver platter, just like what had happened all her life. Dad heard about your most recent stunt, and he wasn't pleased about it. But she looked back outside over to the Hokage monument. It seems your sensei has taken the liberty of having you clean it spotless. However, I don't approve of you being allowed to partake in ramen after just being punished. We're heading home now. Dad wants to have a word with you, she said. Wait, Haruki. Don't you think that's a little hard on her? Asked Irika, coming to Yukiko's rescue. The girl in question smiled at her sensei, before turning back towards her sister with pleading eyes. With all due respect, Irika, I believe you were far too easy on her. Remember that I outrank you, and this is a matter that will be decided within by the Hokage himself. Let's go, Yukiko. Yukiko mumbled something to herself before rising from her stool and walking out of the stand. Irika looked like he had wanted to say something, but he let both sisters go. Yukiko walked with her posture completely slumped, almost afraid to look up at her older sister. While in some ways she was hyperactive and happy, in others she completely lacked confidence and self-esteem. Just being around her sister seemed to awaken those feelings within her. She was treated like a hero around the village for holding the Rabi, something she was grateful for, and slightly embarrassed by, but it would be a lie to say that she was more revered than her sister. Kyuubi was by far a bigger threat than the Rabi was, and it had done far more damage to the village, in comparison to the lizard who was unable to even breach the village gates. She was also more talented than the younger girl was, and her work ethic was something to be admired. She was the perfect image of everything the Namikaze family ever wanted in a child. Even now, as they wandered throughout the village, she could see boys ogling her, and nearly all of the surrounding villages were whispering in reverence for her, rather than the hate that could have been expected. However, Yukiko cocked her ear when she thought she heard a sullen-faced man walk past and speak. Fucking Marisu bitch, you'll have a deconstruction someday, she thought she heard the man whisper. She turned away to see the sullen-faced man, but he was silently walking down the road. She took her eyes off him as he walked into a store and leaned on the fourth wall of the building. Bewildered by the experience, she didn't even notice that they had reached the front gate to the compound where she had lived all these years. The two A and B guards bowed as both girls took off their sandals and entered the main mansion, where both of their parents would surely be at this time of day. They heard the clanging of plates in the kitchen, and realized that one of their servants was likely finishing up the dishes. Haruki picked up on idle conversation coming from the main living room, and recognized the voices immediately due to her advanced hearing. She led her younger sister into the living room, where both of their parents were sitting on the couch, talking in slightly hushed voices about what was likely Yukiko's latest stunt. Her mother seemed somewhat upset, and she glared lightly at her younger daughter as she entered the room. But that was to be expected. Her mother was still as beautiful as ever, but she seemed a lot older because of the sheer bitter expression that seemed to be on her face half the time. Her father was physically showing more signs of age, but he seemed younger than her since he had always seemed somewhat cheery, or at least as cheery as you could get after losing a child. Kushina was about to speak, but Minato beat her to it. "Yukiko, please sit. We've got something important to tell the both of you." It was strange, but her father really didn't seem that upset about the vandalized Hokage monument. And from the looks of it, either did her mother. In fact, they seemed to be somewhat proud. "Dad, aren't you going to punish her for what she pulled today?" said Haruki indignantly, allowing emotion for the first time since she saw her sister today. Yukiko winced, thinking that her parents would be reminded to punish her. "Haruki, I know that Irika made her clean the monument from top to bottom. That's enough punishment for one day. What's important to know is that your sister's final exam is tomorrow. It's a very momentous occasion, and we have much more important things to announce than a prank." Minato retaliated, his voice leaving room for no arguments. Haruki looked like she was about to talk back, say something about how she had graduated 5 years early instead of just 1. However, despite her sentiments about the occasion, she kept her mouth shut and stalked over to sit on the couch with the others. Minato sighed heavily as she sat down, in a slightly brooding mood. "Well, Yukiko, I'm sure you're aware what resides in you, right?" he began lightly, after Kushina had given him the approval to continue. Yukiko seemed to know what was going on already, and she nodded her confidently, which eased Minato's concerns a little bit. "Okay, then you're likely aware that Kushina put on a specific seal when she sealed the Rabi inside of you. This seal allows you to draw upon the chakra of the beast, and use it as your own power. When you graduate tomorrow, we think it's about time for you to tap into that reservoir of power. It will surely grant you great strength, as well as protect you in times of crisis." Yukiko smiled slightly, having come to the conclusion that this was all about. It was wiped off her face when her father adopted a completely serious look. "But Yukiko, I hope you realize that harnessing the power of a bijou is no laughing matter. It's not going to be easy, and if you lose control of it, you could end up hurting your allies or the ones you love. That's why we've prepared for this situation beforehand," he said, looking over at Haruki, and then over to Yukiko. "You know by now that your sister has gone through similar training with the Kyuubi for almost 5 years. She can control up to 7 tails of the beast's chakra without losing herself, but the Rabi is a comparatively weaker bijou, and won't take nearly as much effort to master the usage of its power. However, Haruki is still very experienced with controlling her bijou. Over the past year, the 3 of us have worked on a technique that will allow the 2 of you to link mindscapes, allowing you and your sister to both subjugate and control the Rabi. It will be a battle of willpower, though with Haruki at your side, there's no doubt in my mind you'll be able to subdue the beast," Minato explained. Haruki seemed to forget about her previous problems with Yukiko's pranks, and she flashed a reassuring smile to Haruki, who seemed to be getting slightly nervous. It was a rare occurrence to see her smile like that, to say the least. "We hope that you will be able to subjugate him easily. Starting tomorrow, we will begin your training on how to harness the chakra of the Rabi, and when you're capable of it, you will be ready to subjugate your bijou. But for now, you need to get some rest. You have a big day tomorrow," finished Minato, the light tone of his voice returning as he smiled at his youngest. Yukiko almost felt like arguing, but regardless of her opinion, she wandered up the stairs to her bedroom after a quick good night. Yukiko winced when her father pulled her into a one-armed hug. She had successfully called upon the bijou's chakra, but she had to train herself to the bone in order to activate it willingly. Her father had mentioned something about it activating subconsciously during times of high stress or anger, but she at least seemed to be able to use it willingly now. It was merely 3 days after her graduation, she hadn't even been assigned her team yet, and she was already capable of calling on the chakra. Her father was stunned when she activated it for the first time, claiming that no one had ever been able to learn something so advanced in such a short period of time. Her mother and sister stood off towards the side, having a soft smile and an arrogant smirk on their faces, respectively. She walked up towards them slowly, too tired to even speak. She then promptly collapsed onto the dirt out of sheer exhaustion. Her father laughed at that. "Seems like you've tuckered yourself out today, Yukiko," so I guess we'll hold off the mind synchronization until tomorrow. However, both of you girls need to be prepared for it, he said, addressing both of his daughters. Haruki nodded stoically, but Yukiko simply smiled, proud of herself for being able to accomplish something in less amount of time than Haruki. The next day, Yukiko walked out into personal training field to find the center of it covered in a large black marking that was about 20 feet in diameter. Come to think of it, she felt like she had seen it somewhere before. Then again, it was a spiral, and there were spirals all over the place in her life. Her father was the one who was drawing the thing, as he was putting the finishing touches to the ink seal when she had walked out into the yard. His paintbrush drew with perfect finesse and precision, and she felt at ease seeing his skillful handiwork. He barely acknowledged her presence, as he produced 2 slips of paper from his pocket, and in seconds had drawn identical seals to each of the slips. He tied the paper to a pair of kunai, and stabbed the blades into the ground, at opposite ends of the seal. With his task finished, he walked up to the girl, clutching her shoulders gently as if to relax her. All right, Yukiko. The seal's all set, and we're ready for the procedure to occur. If you would, please stand in the center while I go get your mother and sister so we can activate it. Trembling just a little bit, the girl took her place in the center of the seal, while in under a minute her father had brought both of the other ladies of the house out towards the training field. Sparing no words, Haruki marched right up towards the center of the seal and stood next to her sister. Kushina followed behind, and using her patented chakra chains, connected both Haruki's seal and Yukiko's seal to one another. After she had finished, she went and took her position at one of the kunai, while Minato looked after the other one. Haruki wasn't really sure what happened next though. Having her seal connected to Haruki's had made her somewhat dizzy and delirious, and her sister didn't seem to be faring any better. She thought she vaguely saw both her parents channeling chakra into the kunai, and heard them shout something very muffled that she couldn't make out. She looked down blearily, noticing that the seal and the chakra chains were glowing a bright blue. And then, she blacked out. When she came to, she was face up in about 6 inches of murky water. She was staring at a dimly lit stone ceiling, and to her left was a dark corridor that was basically warning her to not go that way. In the opposite direction was, well... Is that it can't be, she thought, as fear wormed its way into her stomach. There, to the right of her, was an enormous golden cage, with a flimsy piece of paper that read seal on it. She couldn't see past it at all, as it was covered in darkness. Getting to her feet, she cautiously edged closer towards the cage, trying to get a glimpse into the darkness. She didn't know what to do. Her sister was nowhere to be found, and wasn't this supposed to be a mental link? She strained her eyes, and she thought she could feel some slight rustling from beyond the cage, and all of a sudden, 2 enormous reptilian eyes snapped open in the darkness, its attention drawn to the new arrival. Naruto almost growled as he surveyed the small, human girl who stood shakily outside of his cage. That was Yukiko, wasn't it? His youngest sister, who seemed to be a Konoha ninja now, if the forehead protector was anything to go by. It was the first time he had seen her in over a decade. While he could occasionally sense her emotions, this was the first time he had seen her face to face. But he knew why she was here. He had noticed that his chakra seemed to be getting sapped from him these past few days, and he knew that she had been forcibly taking his power. Now, she was likely here so she could subdue him. What are you doing here? Asked Naruto, prompting to play dumb about the entire reason she was here. Yukiko backpedaled at the sound of his voice, and the deep anger that seemed to resonate within it. Naruto's golden yellow chakra flared up across his body for the first time, illuminated the dark chamber in the back to where Yukiko could see him for the first time. Her eyes widened at the sight of him, and the stakes that were impaling his limbs and chest to the floor. He grinned viciously, showing a full mouth of serrated teeth. Speechless, are you? Trust me, I'm not fond of conversing with a brain-dead kid that doesn't even know her purpose in coming here. He jabbed at the human girl. Well, that did it. She seemed to take affront to the insults, and her temper boiled over as she finally realized just who she was talking to. Hey, I'm not a brain-dead kid, you dumb lizard. You're taking up residence within my body, so you're going to have to pay rent by giving me control of all your chakra, she said. In case you didn't realize, I didn't ask to be put in this place, so I owe you nothing. Get that through your thick skull and maybe we could be a bit more civil, the Bijou retaliated. Hey, your scaly ass deserves to be in here after what you did. Why you? The girl was shaking with rage now, her voice as venomous as the reptile within the cage. Why you killed my brother, you monster! I hate you, I hate you! She screamed, all her emotions about the situation spilling out towards the source of her problem. Naruto seemed taken aback for a moment at this confession, before he reared back and gave a full-blown belly laughter that echoed throughout the chamber, though it seemed to be filled with mirth and anger, as much as it was amusement. Yukiko shook at Naruto's laughter, tears forming in her eyes as she stared at the beast hatefully. You think, oh, that's rich. Listen here, little girl. He began, but he was cut off by a low rumbling that shook the entire room, almost like an earthquake had happened. Yukiko looked frantically over her shoulder, noticing that the hallway behind her was beginning to fade, and something new was taking its place. It was a room almost identical to the one she was in, down to the 6-inch deep water she was standing in. The room materialized into existence, the point where the water in her room ended met with the area where the water started in the other. On the far end of the connecting rooms, a large cage similar to the one behind her appeared. It was almost identical, golden and with a piece of paper on it, though it lacked the strange chains that ran across the ceiling in her room into Naruto's cage. At the base of the cage, a tall blonde-haired girl stumbled forward towards Haruki, and the earthquake didn't stop. As Haruki got closer, Yukiko felt a sudden nausea overcome her, and she felt shaky. She ran forward to catch her collapsing sister, though she ended up falling as well. Haruki-ne, what happened? She asked weakly, breathing heavily. It was too exhausting to maintain the mental link. We've unexpectedly exhausted all our chakra linking up our minds. We can't maintain a presence in the linked mindscape. We need to release the technique and go back to reality. Our minds will be separated in about 10 minutes. Hold on to me, and I'll take us back, she said. Yukiko nodded weakly, pulling herself to her feet. She wrapped her arms around her sister's bare midriff, as the older ANBU captain placed her hands in a ram seal. Keikai, she shouted weakly, releasing her chakra and dispelling the technique. The two girls disappeared from the linked mindscape, though the mind in question remained connected for a little while longer.